Welcome back to Cosmic Wand, where the wand chooses the wizard and the wizard chooses chaos. Today's tale, Harry's Gringotts blood test at age 8 named him lord of all 4 founder houses and Dumbledore lost Hogwarts. Before we dive in, do the little bit of magic that keeps this channel alive, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so the next adventure finds you the moment it drops. Comfortable, wand at the ready, then let's begin. Chapter 1, The Seven drops the thing about number 4, Privet Drive, was that it had been engineered to be unremarkable, and Harry Potter had decided at the age of 6 that this was a kind of lie. He had worked it out lying in the cupboard under the stairs, listening to the boiler tick. A house this aggressively ordinary required effort. Somebody mowed the lawn to the exact length of every other lawn. Somebody bought the same hatchback as the neighbors and washed it on the same Sunday. Ordinariness was not the absence of a decision. It was a decision made over and over by people who were terrified of what would happen if they stopped, which raised an interesting question. What were they so afraid of? Harry, 8 years old that July, suspected the answer was him. He sat on the back step shelling peas into a colander because Aunt Petunia had told him to, and because doing the chore badly cost more than doing it well, and a clever person learned to price things accurately. The garden smelled of cut grass and the neighbor's bonfire. Dudley was inside watching the television at a volume that suggested the set was personally on trial. Uncle Vernon was at work, selling drills to men who would use them twice. A pea rolled off Harry's knee. He caught it before it reached the dirt. His hand had moved before he decided to move it, which happened sometimes and which he had learned never ever to mention. That was the other thing he'd worked out. Strange events occurred around him. A teacher's wig had turned blue. A jumper had shrunk to the size of a doll S. He had once found himself sitting on the school roof with no memory of climbing, and Aunt Petunia's face when she collected him had gone the particular gray of a woman watching a debt come due. The adults called these things accidents and then punished him as though they were crimes, which was contradictory, and Harry distrusted contradictions the way other children distrusted the dark. He was still turning this over when the gate opened on its own. Not the wind, there was no wind. The latch lifted, the gate swung, and a person walked up the path who was not built on the same plan as other people. He came to perhaps Harry's chest, which would have made him short for a child and was something else entirely for someone whose face had the seamed, considered look of a being who had outlived several civilizations and judged them all by the same exacting standard. His skin had the color of old pewter. His fingers were long, the knuckles enlarged, and they ended in nails filed to careful points. He wore a coat of charcoal wool cut with a precision that the entire Dursley household, pooling its resources, could not have afforded. Under one arm he carried a flat case of black leather, and he carried it the way surgeons carry their instruments and assassins carry theirs. Stopped at the foot of the step and regarded Harry over a pair of half-moon spectacles that did nothing to soften the assessment behind them. Harry James Potter, he said. It was not a question. He pronounced all 3 names as though reading them off a contract, which it would turn out he essentially was. That's me, Harry said. He had not moved. The colander was still on his knees. He had found that staying very still was a reliable way to make adults explain themselves. You're not from the council. I am not. You're not a teacher. I am insulted you would consider it, and you opened the gate without touching it. The pewter face did something around the eyes that was not a smile but shared a border with one. Observant. Your kind is occasionally observant when not occupied being loud. My kind, Harry repeated. We will get to that. The visitor produced from inside the charcoal coat a square of stiff parchment sealed with a disc of red wax the size of a coin. The wax bore an impression Harry couldn't read at that distance, some clustered geometry of lines. My name is Scarnack of the firm of Gringotts in the Office of Estates and Reconciliations. I am here on a writ. You will want your guardians present since they will shortly attempt to involve themselves, and it is more efficient to involve them at a time of my choosing than theirs. Harry considered this. He set the colander down with deliberate care, peas and all. They won't like you. No one likes my office, said Scarnack. We are the office that tells people the truth about money. It is the least popular truth there is. The doorbell, when Scarnack rang it, produced from Aunt Petunia the kind of welcome reserved for tax inspectors and Jehovah's Witnesses until she saw who stood on the step. Then her long face emptied out entirely, the way a glass empties all at once. She said a word. The word was no, and she said it quietly, the way you'd say it to a nightmare you'd hoped had agreed to stay in the past. Mrs. Dursley, said Scarnack with the courtesy of a blade sliding from a sheath. We have not met. You will know my employer. May I come in? The alternative is that I conduct this on your doorstep where your neighbors take such an interest. She let him in. Of course she let him in. The neighbors were the one weapon that worked on Petunia Dursley, and Scarnack had found it inside 30 seconds, and Harry, trailing them into the lounge with the peas forgotten, revised his estimate of the afternoon sharply upward. What followed was a negotiation conducted between 2 parties of grossly unequal power, both of whom knew it. Petunia stood by the mantelpiece with her arms folded so tightly her shoulders had climbed toward her ears. Scarnack sat in Uncle Vernon's armchair without being invited, set the leather case across his knees, and laid out the situation in sentences that did not waste a single syllable. "There exists," he said, "an account at Gringotts. It was opened a great many years ago and has lain dormant under a standing instruction. That instruction contains what we call an octennial clause. Do you know what octennial means, Mr. Potter?" "8," said Harry. "Octo, like octopus, 8 years." 8 years, Scarnack agreed, and the not-quite smile returned to the border of his mouth. In the child's 8th year, the clause requires that the heir of the account be verified, not assumed, verified by blood. My firm does not take the word of mothers, fathers, ministries, or wizards with long beards on the matter of who is owed what. We take blood because blood does not lobby, does not forget, and does not lie to make itself look better at parties. "This has nothing to do with us," Petunia said. Her voice had gone high and thin. "We took him in, we fed him, we never asked your lot for a single. Madam, with respect, no one is auditing your hospitality." Scarnack did not look at her. He looked at Harry, and that was somehow worse for Petunia because it meant she had ceased to be the relevant party in her own lounge. The clause is not satisfied by good intentions. It is satisfied by a drop of the heir's blood on a charter parchment, witnessed by an officer of the bank. "I am that officer. The witnessing must occur before the child's 9th birthday or the account passes into a contested state, and contested states cost everyone money, including Mrs. Dursley, you." That last word landed. Harry saw it land. Petunia's arms loosened a fraction. She had spent her whole life being told that the strange world she'd married away from could only ever take from her, and here at last was a sentence implying it might cost her something to refuse. "What's in the account?" Harry said. Scarnack turned the half-moons on him. "You ask the correct question, which I will note is more than most adults manage. The honest answer is that I do not fully know. My writ instructs me to verify the heir. It does not instruct me to inventory the holdings, and at Gringotts we are very precise about the difference between the question we have been paid to answer and the question we have not. What I can tell you is that the account is old. Old enough that the verification ritual it specifies has not been performed in my working lifetime, and I have been working since before this street had a name." He opened the leather case. Inside, held in fitted velvet, lay 3 objects: a short blade of some dark metal, its edge a hairline of brighter light, a squat bottle of ink so black it seemed to drink the lamplight rather than reflect it, and a single sheet of parchment, yellowed to the color of weak tea, dense with writing Harry couldn't read upside down, and bearing across its center 4 blank shapes pressed faintly into the fiber, like the ghosts of seals that had not yet been stamped. "Not here," Scarnack said, closing the case before Petunia could lean in for a better look. "The verification is performed on bank premises, before the bank's own wards, or it is not performed at all. A drop of blood is the easiest thing in the world to forge in a stranger's lounge, and the hardest thing in the world to forge under the eye of a goblin who would lose his post for permitting it. We will go to London tomorrow. You may accompany the child, or you may sign a release. I would prefer the release, frankly. You are not enjoying yourself." Petunia signed the release. She signed it at the kitchen table with a biro that skipped, and her hand shook, and she did not look at Harry once during the entire operation, and Harry understood from this that she was not angry. Anger he could have read. This was closer to a woman shutting a door she had been holding against a flood for 8 years, because the water had finally found another way in, and there was no longer any point pretending the door had ever worked. "Be ready at 7, Scarnack told Harry on the step as the evening went blue around the privet hedges. "Bring nothing, you will need nothing. Everything you require already belongs to you, though you do not yet know in what quantity." He paused. The half-moons caught the last of the light. "I will give you one piece of advice without charge, Mr. Potter, which is unusual for me, so attend. Tomorrow, persons of significance are going to tell you who you are. Listen to all of them. Believe none of them until you have seen the blood. Blood is the only witness in this matter that has nothing to sell you." He went down the path. At the gate he did not reach for the latch. The latch lifted, the gate swung, and he was gone into the ordinary street that was working so hard as always at being ordinary. Harry stood on the step a long while after. Inside, the television announced a winner. Somewhere above him, a guardian who was not his guardian wept in a manner she would deny in the morning. He thought about the 4 blank shapes pressed into old parchment, waiting to be filled, and he thought, "Everything I require already belongs to me." He decided he liked that sentence. He decided to find out if it was true. London at 7 in the morning was a machine that had not finished warming up. Scarnack collected him from the end of the street in a black cab that the driver seemed unable to remember he was driving, and they crossed the city as the shops were unlatching their shutters, and the cab let them out on a street Harry's eyes kept trying to slide off, a crooked little artery off the main thoroughfare where the brick was older and the angles were wrong. The bank stood at the head of it. It was white and it laned. That was Harry's first thought, that the entire enormous building laned, the way a tall woman leans down to hear a child, and the lane was deliberate, and the deliberateness was the whole message. Burnished bronze doors. Beyond them a second set of doors in silver, and on the silver words cut deep: "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed, for those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn." Bedtime reading, Skarnak said, not slowing. We update it when the rhymes grow stale, which is to say roughly once a century. The sentiment does not age. The hall inside ran longer than seemed possible from the street, a cathedral of marble and lamplight, and along its length, behind high counters, sat row upon row of Skarnak's people. They weighed gems, they counted coins into stacks that did not waver. They wrote in ledgers with quills that scratched a sound like distant rain. None of them looked up, and the not looking up was its own performance. A hall full of beings demonstrating that the comings and goings of human children were beneath the threshold of their notice, and very nearly beneath the threshold of their contempt. Skarnak led him past all of it, through a door, down a corridor where the marble gave way to stone, and the stone grew older with every step, until the lamps were torches, and the torches threw their shadows up walls that had been raised before England had a word for itself. They stopped at a door of iron banded with bronze, and Skarnak laid his palm flat against it and said something in a language that sounded like rocks settling, and the door opened onto a chamber. The chamber was round. In its center stood a table of black stone, and around the table waited 3 goblins Harry had not met, in coats finer than Skarnak's, and behind them, set into the far wall, a great disk of pale crystal that pulsed very slowly with an inner light like something breathing in its sleep. The verification chamber, Skarnak said. It has stood here since the bank's founding. The crystal you see is a witness stone. It cannot speak, but it cannot lie, and between those two facts rests the entire law of inheritance as my people practice it. The gentlemen present are senior to me. You will address the one in the center as Auditor Grindel. He will conduct the right. I am here as your escort, and should it become necessary, your advocate, which is a word that means I argue with my superiors on your behalf and bill the estate for the privilege. Auditor Grindel was older even than Skarnak, if such a thing could be measured. His eyes were the flat black of river stones. When he spoke, his voice came up from somewhere below his collarbones, and it carried the particular patience of a being who had watched a great many humans discover, in this room, that they were not who they had believed. Harry James Potter, said Grindel. You are here under the octennial clause of an account whose number I will not speak aloud until the right confirms your right to hear it. Do you consent to verification by blood, knowing that the result, whatever it is, becomes a fact of record at this bank and cannot afterward be unsaid, unspun, or renegotiated? Harry looked at the table. The yellowed parchment lay upon it now, weighted at each corner by a small black stone. The 4 blank seal shapes waited in its center. The dark blade lay beside it, and the bottle of light-drinking ink. He thought about Skarnak's advice. Believe none of them until you have seen the blood. Here then was the blood about to be seen. What does the ink do? Harry said. You explained the blade, you explained the parchment, nobody explained the ink. Pause crossed the chamber. The 3 senior goblins exchanged a look, and Skarnak, behind Harry, made a low sound in his throat that might, in a goblin, have been a laugh held prisoner. The ink, Grindel said slowly, is mixed with the blood. It is a binding agent. Blood alone fades. Blood in this ink on this parchment fixes the result into the record permanently. You ask after the ink because the ink is the part designed to be forgotten, and you noticed it had been left out. That is a useful habit of mind, child. Hold on to it. The world your blood is about to enter will spend the rest of your life trying to break you of it. I consent, Harry said. They sat him on a stool at the black table. Skarnak rolled back the sleeve of Harry's too large jumper. Grindel took the dark blade in fingers that did not shake, and he did not make a performance of it, did not warn or count down, simply drew the bright edge across the pad of Harry's left thumb in a line so fine that the pain arrived a full second after the cut, a thin, clean line of cold. The blood welled. Grindel caught it on the flat of the blade, 1 drop too, and let it fall into the open mouth of the ink bottle where the black surface accepted it without a ripple. He stoppered the bottle. He shook it 3 times, a dry rattle. He drew a fresh quill across the table and dipped it. The right asks one question, Grindel said. It asks the parchment, whose hand should hold these seals. The parchment does not care what we believe. It does not care what is convenient. It consults the blood, and the blood consults the line, and the line answers. Watch the seals, Mr. Potter, not me, the seals. He touched the quill to the first of the 4 blank shapes. For a moment nothing happened, and Harry had time to register the rain sound of the quills in the great hall far above, the breathing pulse of the witness stone, the cold thread of the cut along his thumb. Then the ink moved. It did not spread the way ink spreads. It climbed. It ran up out of the quill's touch and into the pressed shape and filled it the way water fills a footprint, finding edges Harry hadn't been able to see, and as it filled it took on a form. A lion rampant, its mane a snarl of fine lines, 1 paw raised. Gold leaked into the black. The seal flushed the deep red of old wine. Around it, burned into the parchment in letters that had not been there a moment before, ran a single word: Gryffindor. That, said Skarnak quietly from somewhere behind Harry's shoulder, is not entirely a surprise. The Potter line and the line of Godric have brushed past one another in the records before, distant, diluted, a thread not a rope. Auditor, the 2nd seal, if you please. Let us finish what we came to do and have the child home by lunch. Grindel touched the quill to the 2nd shape. The ink climbed again, faster this time, like the parchment had woken up and was leaning toward the blade. A serpent uncoiled into the second seal, scaled, sinuous, its body nodding back on itself in a figure that suggested it could not be cut because there was no place along it that was not also another place. The seal flushed green. The letters burned themselves into the page. Slytherin. The chamber had gone very still. The senior goblins were no longer exchanging looks. They were staring at the parchment, all three of them, and Harry, watching the watchers, understood that whatever was happening had left the channel marked expected and entered water none of them had charted. 2 founder seals on a single drop of blood, murmured one of the seniors, a goblin with a scar bisecting one eyebrow. Grindel, that has not occurred since. Be quiet, Grindel said, not unkindly. His river-stone eyes had not left the page. The rite is not finished. We do not interpret a rite that is not finished. 2 seals can be coincidence. Coincidence is a thing my people do not believe in, but we permit it provisionally, pending evidence. Mr. Potter, the 3rd seal, are you watching? I'm watching, Harry said. His voice came out level. Underneath the level, something was unfolding in his chest that he had no name for yet and did not reach for. He kept his eyes on the parchment, as instructed. The seals, not the faces, the seals. The quill touched the 3rd shape. This time the ink did not climb. It struck all at once, the whole seal flooding dark and then bright in the space of a heartbeat, and what surfaced was an eagle, wings mantled, head turned in profile to fix the chamber with a single drawn eye, and the seal flushed the blue of deep water, of the sky just after the sun has gone, and the word came up out of the page like something surfacing for air. Ravenclaw, the goblin with the scarred eyebrow, sat down. There was a chair behind him and he found it without looking, the way one does when one's legs have privately decided the matter ahead of one. 3, said the 3rd senior, who had not yet spoken. His voice had gone to a whisper. 3 founder houses, in one child. Grindel, the records, the registry. Do you understand what the registry will? I understand precisely what the registry will do, Grindel said. I have understood since the 2nd seal. That is why my hand is steady and yours is not. Sit, Borek, sit, all of you. There is a 4th shape on this parchment, and it is empty, and an empty shape on a verification charter is not a result, it is a question. We do not leave the bank's questions hanging in the air to be answered by rumor. We answer them here under the stone where the answer is true. He lifted the quill. A drop of the blood-dark ink trembled at its tip. Mr. Potter. I am going to ask you something, and your answer changes nothing about the right, so answer honestly. Are you afraid? Harry looked at the 3 filled seals. Lion, serpent, eagle, red, green, blue, gold leaking into all of them like light through cracks. No, he said, and then, because Scarnack had taught him in one afternoon that precision was the only currency these beings respected, I don't know what I'm supposed to be afraid of yet. When I do, I'll tell you. Something moved across Grindel's ancient face that Harry would spend years failing to fully name. The nearest word was recognition, but it was recognition with an edge of grief in it, the look of someone meeting, in a child, a weight he would not have wished on a child. Good, Grindel said. Watch the seal. He touched the quill to the 4th and final shape. Afterward, Harry would try many times to describe what filled the last seal, and would fail, because the others had filled with creatures and the last one filled with something that was not a creature at all. The ink climbed, and where the first 3 had resolved into lion and serpent and eagle, the 4th resolved into a shape that took Harry a moment to read because it was so plain. A badger, low and broad and unbothered, its black mask a single confident stroke, but around the badger the ink did not stop. It kept climbing out past the border of the seal, and where the other 3 seals had each flushed a single color, this one ran with all of them at once, gold and green and blue braiding into a 4th color that was, somehow, the color of soil, of bread, of the warm dark under a stone where things take root, and the word that burned itself onto the page was not one word but came with a 2nd word beneath it that Harry had not seen on the others. Hufflepuff. And below it, smaller in letters that glowed and then cooled to ordinary black, confirmed, heir paramount, all 4. The witness stone in the wall, which had pulsed slow and sleepy since they entered, flared. It did not flicker. It flared, a single soundless pulse of white light that filled the round chamber and pressed flat against Harry's skin like heat off a road. And far above them in the great marble hall, every quill stopped scratching at once, and a silence rolled down through the bank from top to bottom, the silence of several hundred goblins simultaneously deciding that whatever had just discharged through the stones beneath their feet was worth, for one moment, looking up. Then it passed. The witness stone dimmed back to its sleeping breath, the torches steadied. The parchment lay on the black table, 4 seals filled, 4 founder names burned into its fiber, and 3 of the most senior officers of the oldest bank in the country stood around it not saying anything at all. Grindel set down the quill. He did it carefully, the way you set down something that has turned out to be heavier than it looked. Then he folded his long pewter hands on the edge of the table and regarded Harry across the parchment, and when he spoke, the patience in his voice had been replaced by something more formal, the register of a being who had stopped conducting a routine procedure and started building a record that would outlive everyone in the room. Harry James Potter, Grindel said. By the blood on this charter, witnessed by the stone and recorded by the bank, you are confirmed heir paramount of the line of Godric Gryffindor. You are confirmed heir paramount of the line of Salazar Slytherin. You are confirmed heir paramount of the line of Rowena Ravenclaw. You are confirmed heir paramount of the line of Helga Hufflepuff. 4 houses, 4 lines that have not converged in a single blood since the houses themselves were founded. They converge in you. Do you understand any part of what I have just said? Some of it, Harry said. Heir of 4 old families. Families everyone's heard of by the way you're all standing. He looked from face to face. Not one of them contradicted him. But you used a different word the first time. You said heir paramount. Paramount means above. Above what? Behind him, Skarnak exhaled through his teeth, a long breath that in a human would have been a low whistle. He found it, Skarnak said to no one, to the room, to the stone in the wall. 8 years old, 2 seals deep into the worst legal earthquake this bank has processed in 3 centuries, and the question he asks is the one question that matters. Auditor, I withdraw any complaint I may once have lodged about being assigned this writ. Grindel did not smile, but the river-stone eyes warmed by some fraction too small to measure. Above what? He repeated. Mr. Potter, I am going to answer your question, and I am going to answer it precisely, because you have earned precision, and because imprecision in this matter would be a kind of theft. The 4 founders did not only found 4 houses. They founded one thing together, jointly, holding it in undivided shares, and they wrote the terms of that holding into a charter that predates every other charter my bank administers, and which my bank has held in trust, untriggered, for 1,000 years, waiting for a blood that could trigger it. He laid one long finger on the 4 braided seals. They founded a school. The charter that built it specifies that the founder's authority over it passes by blood to their heirs, and that should the 4 lines ever again converge in a single heir, that heir holds not one share but all 4, which is to say the whole. Not a seat on its board, not a vote among governors, the deed, the wardstone, the standing, ancient and binding ownership of the castle, the grounds, the wards, and the magic bound into its foundations. The torchlight moved on the old stone. Somewhere far above, the quills had begun again, hesitantly, the rain starting back up after a clap of thunder. The school, Grindel said, is called Hogwarts, and as of the blood that dried on this charter 90 seconds ago, child, you own it. Harry sat very still on the stool at the black stone table, the cut on his thumb a thin cold line, 4 founder seals burning quietly in front of him, and did the only thing that made sense to him in that moment, which was to test the claim against the world to see whether it held. All of it, he said, all of it, the building, the land it's on, the locks on the doors. The locks on the doors, Grindel agreed, answer to the wardstone. The wardstone answers to the deed. The deed, Mr. Potter, answers to you. Then there's a wizard, Harry said slowly, and he was not guessing now, he was reasoning, laying one fact against another as methodically as he shelled peas into a colander. Who's been running it? A school that old, that important, somebody runs it. Somebody decides who comes in and who stays out. Somebody who, if your charter is right and your blood is right, has been making those decisions in a house that was never his. The 3 senior goblins were silent. Skarnak behind him had gone very still. There is such a wizard, Grindel said. His name is Albus Dumbledore. He is the headmaster of Hogwarts, the chief warlock of the Wisengamot, and by most reckonings the most powerful sorcerer alive. He placed you with your mother's sister 8 years ago. He has, I am given to understand, taken a personal and ongoing interest in your upbringing, your safety, and your future, conducted at a distance and without, I should note, ever once informing this bank of an interest that touches an account under our administration. Harry turned this over, the cut on his thumb, the braided seals. The headmaster with the long beard who had set him on a doorstep and taken an interest from a distance and never told the only institution that could have told him the truth about himself. He doesn't know, Harry said, about the blood, the 4 houses, any of it. He cannot know, said Grindel. The rite concluded 90 seconds ago. No owl has left this building. No word has passed the wards. The ancient goblin folded his hands again, and his flat black eyes held Harry's, and for the second time that morning something like grief crossed them, was mastered and put away. Which means, Mr. Potter, that for this one brief and irreplaceable moment, you know something about yourself that the most powerful wizard alive does not. I have administered this bank for a long time. I will give you, as my colleague gave you yesterday, one piece of counsel without charge. That moment is the most valuable asset you will ever hold. More than the gold, more than the castle. Spend it carefully, spend it slowly. And whatever you do, do not let anyone tell you it was never yours to spend. They took him to an office to do the part nobody put on the engravings, which was the paperwork. The office belonged to Skarnak, and it was small and immaculate and lined floor to ceiling with ledgers bound in the same charcoal wool as his coat. He sat Harry in a chair sized for an adult so that Harry's feet did not reach the floor, and he poured, without asking, a cup of something hot and amber that smelled of cloves and tasted of nothing Harry could name, and steadied the cold thread still running along his thumb. Drink that, Skarnek said. You have had a morning. The body knows it before the mind does, and a goblin does not like to watch a client faint. It sets a poor precedent. Now, you asked the right question upstairs, so I'm going to assume you can hold several heavy things at once, and I'm going to hand them to you quickly, because the longer we sit here the closer we come to the part of the day where the world finds out what the stone already knows. The wizard with the beard, Harry said. Dumbledore. He finds out and then what? And then he comes. Skarnek settled behind his desk and laced his long fingers. Not today, perhaps not this month. But a wizard does not run a thing for 10 years without growing instruments to feel when it shifts under him, and something has shifted, Mr. Potter. The wardstone of Hogwarts felt your blood dry on that charter. I felt the bank's foundations register it from 3 floors up. He will have felt something too, and being who he is, he will not rest until he has named it. When he names it, he will come, and he will come kindly. That is the thing you must understand about Albus Dumbledore before you ever meet him. The dangerous ones do not arrive with teeth bared. They arrive with sweets in their pockets and your best interests on their tongue, and they are entirely sincere, which is what makes them difficult to refuse. Harry drank the amber thing. It was warm all the way down. He placed me with the Dursleys. He did, for my safety. That's what Grindel said. He took an interest in my safety from a distance for 8 years. That is the account given, yes. Harry set the cup down on the edge of the desk with both hands, as he had been taught to set down things that could break. Then he's not very good at it, he said. Or my safety wasn't the thing he was protecting, because I slept in a cupboard, and a person who actually cared where I slept would have known that, and a person who knew that and left me there was protecting something else and calling it me. The office was quiet. Behind his desk, Skarnek regarded the 8-year-old in the oversized chair with the still, weighing attention of a being recalculating a sum he had thought already settled. You will want to keep that thought private, Skarnek said at last, very evenly, for a great many years, but you will want to keep it. Most people, handed proof that the great wizard failed them, rush to explain the failure away, because a world with a flawed protector in it frightens them less than a world with none. You did not reach for the comfort, you reached for the sum. That is rare, and it is dangerous to those who do not expect it, and you are 8, and I find I am no longer entirely sure what to build the estate for this conversation, because I no longer believe I am the one conducting it. Why are you helping me? Harry said. Not the bank. You keep giving me advice without charge. Goblins don't do anything without charge. You said so yourself, more or less. Skarnek's long fingers went still on the desk. A fair audit, he said. Here is the honest entry then, since you have a talent for spotting the padded line. The bank is not helping you out of affection. The bank is helping you because for 1,000 years your 4 houses have been administered by a school that answers to a wizard who answers to no one, and a wizard who answers to no one is, from where my people sit, a debt that has never once been called in. You are the called-in debt, Mr. Potter. You are the audit those founders wrote into their own charter and left sleeping in our vaults, trusting that one day the right blood would come to collect. We are not your friends, we are your auditors. It happens this once that those point the same direction. Enjoy the alignment, it will not always hold. You said you'd hand me the heavy things quickly, Harry said. You're stalling. Why? Because the next thing I hand you, you cannot give back. Skarnek opened a drawer. From it he drew a flat box of black velvet, and he set it on the desk between them but did not open it. Inheritance at this bank is not a piece of paper. The charter confirmed your right. Right is not the same as possession. Possession is taken. There are in the deepest vault of this institution, in a chamber no living goblin has had cause to open, 4 rings, the signets of the 4 houses. To take up an estate is to take up its ring, and the ring does not merely sit on a finger. It reads the wearer, it opens itself to a true heir, and it closes against a false one. And what opens, in the case of these 4, is not a vault of coins. It is the founders' magic itself, the standing power they bound into their own bloodlines so that their heirs would never again be the weak link in the wall they built. He turned the velvet box a quarter turn on the desk, lining it up with some private edge. I will not open the chamber today. You are not ready, and an heir who takes up 4 founders. Rings on the same afternoon he learned the founders existed is an heir who burns out his hand and his mind in several yards of corridor, and I would have to fill in a form about it. But I want you to know the rings are there. I want you to know what waits at the bottom of your own name. And I want your first decision as lord of these houses, the very first, made here in this room, before any wizard in England knows you have a decision to make. What decision? Whether the world finds out today. Skarnek spread his hands. I can have it announced before sundown. Heralds to the Wisengamot, notice to the ministry, and owl to the headmaster's own desk. The shock of it would be enormous, and it would be yours, and the chaos that followed would be aimed at a child who does not yet know the rules of the room he would be thrown into. Or, pause, or the bank says nothing. The record stands sealed, true, and silent. You go home to your cupboard, Mr. Potter, which I do not enjoy proposing, and you spend the next 3 years learning everything I and my colleagues are prepared to teach you about law and gold and the wizards who deal in both, and you walk into that room only when you have decided you own it. The stone has given you one irreplaceable moment of knowing what your enemies do not. You can spend it all today loudly for nothing, or you can invest it. Harry looked at the velvet box that would not be opened today. He looked at the ledgers in their charcoal bindings. He thought about 3 years, which to an 8-year-old is most of a remembered life, and he thought about a cupboard and a headmaster with sweets in his pockets who came kindly and 4 rings at the bottom of his own name. "Invest it," Harry said. Scarnack did not smile. But he inclined his head slowly, the way Harry would later learn goblins incline their heads only to equals and to debts they intended to honor. "Then we have a great deal of work to do," Scarnack said, "and almost no one may know we are doing it. Welcome to Gringotts, Lord Potter. You will find we keep better secrets than your headmaster. It is, after all, the entire business we are in." Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Keeping Your House. The instruments told Albus Dumbledore first, the way they always did, in the language of small sounds. There were a great many of them in the circular office, the spindly silver devices on their spindle-legged tables, and over the years he had stopped consciously hearing most of them, the way a person stops hearing his own clocks. They whirred, they puffed colored smoke. One of them, a thing of nested rings that tracked the blood wards around a certain house in Surrey, emitted at intervals a sound like a contented cat, and that sound was the one he listened for without admitting that he listened, because it meant a particular child was alive and where Dumbledore had left him. The cat sound was still there, that was the trouble. It was still there, and it was wrong. He set down the letter he had been pretending to read, crossed to the instrument and bent over it, and the nested rings turned through their slow orbits exactly as they had turned for 8 years, and the small contented sound went on, and underneath it, where there had never before been anything at all, ran a second note. A thin one, a high, cold, sustained tone, like a wet finger drawn round the rim of a glass, and it had not been there yesterday. Dumbledore had built the instrument with his own hands. He knew every harmonic it was capable of producing. "This was not one of them, Fawkes," he said to the phoenix drowsing on its perch. "When did that begin?" The phoenix opened one eye, regarded the instrument, and made no answer a human ear could parse, which was the answer he had expected and not the one he had wanted. He did the obvious things first, because the obvious things were obvious for a reason. He checked the blood ward itself, reaching out along the long invisible thread that ran from this tower to the pebble dash and privet of number 4, and found it intact, humming, fed as always by the child's continued residence under his aunt's roof. Lily's protection held. The sacrifice still sang in the mortar. Nothing there had failed, so it was not the ward. The ward was a tributary. The cold new note came from somewhere upstream. From the river the ward drew on, and there was only one river in Britain old enough and deep enough to make an instrument like this sing a tone it had not been built to sing. Slowly, the way one approaches a sound in the dark, Dumbledore turned his attention inward, down through the floor of his office, down through the long roots of the castle itself, to the place every headmaster learned to find in his first year and most learned never to disturb. The wardstone of Hogwarts, the deep heart-rock into which the founders had bound the school's magic, the stone that answered to the headmaster's hand, that opened the doors and warmed the hearths and turned the staircases and kept out what needed keeping out. He laid his awareness against it as he had 10,000 times with the unthinking confidence of long tenancy. The stone did not answer. It was not cold. It was not broken. It was simply suddenly no longer his in the way it had been his that morning, the way a house is no longer yours the instant the deed changes hands, though the furniture has not moved and the key still turns in the lock. He pressed harder. The stone permitted it. It allowed him entry. It ran the doors and warmed the hearths exactly as before. It remained obedient in every visible particular. But somewhere far down in it, below the level where obedience lived, a new authority had woken, and the stone was orienting itself toward that authority the way a flower orients toward a light it has not yet seen rise, and the new authority was not Albus Dumbledore. He withdrew. He straightened. He stood in his office among his small whirring sounds, a tall, stooped figure with a beard like a fall of snow, and he was very still for a long while. "Someone," he said aloud, "has come home." He did not know who. He did not yet know how. But he had spent 100 years learning to read the difference between a thing that has been attacked and a thing that has been inherited, and this was the second kind, and the second kind could not be fought, only met, and the meeting of it would require him to find out, very quietly and very quickly, what the oldest and least talkative institution in Britain had recently done with a drop of somebody's blood. He searched the deeper registers of the castle for 2 more hours before he allowed himself to stop. He walked the dungeon corridors where the stone was oldest and pressed his palm flat to the walls and felt the same thing each time, a great patient reorientation, a 1,000-year machine turning to face a master it had waited 1,000 years to find. By the time he climbed back to his office, the candles had burned to stubs and Fawkes had tucked his head under his wing, and Dumbledore had narrowed the question from who to a short list of houses, and every house on the list was extinct, which meant the answer was a child, which meant the answer was the worst kind of answer there was, because children could not be reasoned with, only loved, and loving the wrong child at the wrong moment had cost him more than he had ever told anyone. He reached for parchment. He began in his looping copperplate a letter to Gringotts. He would regret later how courteous it was. 3 floors under London, in a windowless room with very good light, Harry Potter was being taught to lie to a wizard he had not yet met. "Again," said the goblin across the table. Her name was Ravdoc, and she was the bank's master of the discipline humans called occlumency and goblins called, more accurately, keeping your house. She had the build of a closed fist and a stare that did not blink at conversational intervals. "He will not knock, Lord Potter. That is the entire point of him. The great wizards of your kind regard the inside of another person's skull as a public road they are entitled to walk whenever the traffic suits them. Albus Dumbledore is the most courteous of them, which means he will walk your road gently and apologize if you notice and take what he came for either way. So, again. Show me the front of your house." Harry closed his eyes. 6 weeks of this, 3 evenings a week, smuggled in and out of London under a glamour that made cab drivers forget his face. 6 weeks of learning that a mind was a building and that most people left every door open and every light on and were then astonished when strangers wandered through. He had taken to it as he took to most things, by first becoming annoyed that he had not been taught it years ago. He built the house, not a wall. Ravdoc had been scornful of walls. "A wall says, 'Here is something worth walling,'" she'd told him. "A wall is a signpost that reads valuables this way. You will not build a wall. You will build a dull little house with the curtains open and nothing in the windows but exactly what a poking finger expects to find, and you will let him in the front door, and he will walk the whole ground floor and find a frightened orphan thinking frightened orphan thoughts, and he will leave satisfied, and he will never once suspect there is a cellar." Harry built the dull house. He furnished the ground floor with the things Dumbledore would expect, a confusion about why he was special. A flinch when he thought of his uncle, a diffuse, unfocused yearning to be wanted. He arranged these in the front rooms like furniture in a show home, dust-free and unlived in, and he believed them lightly on the surface, the way you can believe a film while you are watching it. And underneath, behind a door that did not look like a door, he kept the cellar, and in the cellar he kept Scarnack's voice saying "called in debt," and 4 seals burning red and green and blue and the color of bread, and the whole machinery of who he actually was. Ravdoc's stare came at him across the table, and he felt it as a pressure behind his eyes, a polite testing weight, the ghost of what the real thing would be. "Better," she said, releasing him. "Your ground floor convinces. Your cellar door is still a door. We have time. We have, by our estimate, 2 to 3 years before you stand in a room with him, and I intend to spend it making your cellar door into a floor he never thinks to look under." The lessons were not only the house. That was the part Harry had assumed would be the hardest, and that turned out to be the easiest, because lying with the front of his mind was only an extension of 8 years of practice at not being noticed. The harder lessons were the ones in the other windowless rooms with the other goblins, and they came at him faster than he could have wanted and exactly as fast as he could bear. A goblin named Thornwick taught him law, not spells. Law, the architecture of the wizarding world rendered as a thing you could read, a structure with load-bearing walls and decorative ones, and Thornwick's entire pedagogy consisted of teaching Harry to tell them apart. "Your ministry has a Wisengamot," Thornwick said on the first evening, "of 50 seats, and your people are taught that the 50 are equal, and your people are wrong because there are seats and there are seats. The newest were bought last century by families with more gold than blood. The oldest were not bought at all. They are hereditary, attached to houses recognized as ancient, and they cannot be revoked, diluted, or outvoted on certain questions, because the charter that built the Wisengamot reserves to them a thing your modern members have forgotten exists. It is called the Founder's Veto. 4 seats hold it. The seats of Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff, which have sat empty and proxied and voted by default for 1,000 years because no one held the blood to occupy them. There are not 4 votes among 50, Lord Potter. On the questions the charter names, there are 4 votes that no number of the other 46 can overrule. Do you understand what I have just handed you?" Harry understood. He understood it as he understood everything important all at once as a shape. He held 4 seats that could not be outvoted in a body run by a wizard who had spent 100 years assuming no one could outvote him. He did not say this. He said, "Teach me the questions the charter names," and Thornwick, who had been refusing to be impressed by wizards since before the ministry had a building, was fractionally impressed. There were other lessons. A goblin named Bricewold taught him gold, which turned out not to be about counting but about leverage, about how a sum of money was a lever, and the only question worth asking was where you set the fulcrum. A scarred old goblin named Atresh, who had fought in 2 of the rebellions, taught him the history his own kind had been raised to forget, the wars and the treaties and the long humiliations, until Harry understood why the bank had waited 1,000 years for him with something other than patience, and the something was older than patience and harder, and he was careful never to mistake it for affection. And once a month, in a room with no light at all, Ravdoc made him sit in the dark and assemble the dull house in the cellar and the floor that was not a door, faster and faster, until he could build the whole architecture between one heartbeat and the next, and have it ready before a stranger had finished saying hello. And between the lessons, woven through them, came the thing the goblins handed him most carefully of all, which was the truth about his parents. They did not soften it. Harry had asked them not to on the second evening, and they had taken the request as the contract it was. So Atresh told him flatly with the dates and the names about the war, about a wizard who had called himself Lord Voldemort and had decided that blood like Harry's mother's was a stain to be scoured out of the world, and had gathered to himself wizards who agreed, and had killed and killed and killed until the killing had a momentum of its own. About a prophecy, half heard and half reported, that had pointed the wizard's attention at a particular infant. About a night in a village called Godric's Hollow, the name a coincidence and not a coincidence, where James Potter had died in a hallway buying his wife 30 seconds, and Lily Potter had died in a nursery buying her son something older and stranger than 30 seconds, and the wizard had turned his wand on a 1-year-old, and the killing had, for the first and only time in its long career, failed. He did not survive because he was strong, Atresh said. He survived because his mother spent herself to the last drop to make the killing curse rebound, and it rebounded and it took the wizard apart. That is the true account. Lord Potter and your people have made a children's story of it, in which a baby defeated a dark lord, and the story is a lie that flatters everyone, and you will let them go on believing it, because a true account in the wrong hands is a weapon pointed at you, and a flattering lie is camouflage, but you will know the true account. You will carry it. Your mother is the reason you are alive, and the reason is not love in the way the storybooks mean it. It is love rendered into law, made binding, paid in full. The most expensive magic there is. Do not waste it being someone small. Harry carried it down into the cellar with the rest and did not waste it and went on counting down. The Dursleys noticed that something had changed in him and could not have said what, and the not being able to say frightened them more than a visible change would have. It was not rebellion. Rebellion they would have understood and crushed. It was that the chores got done perfectly without complaint, and that the complaints they had relied on as proof of their power simply stopped arriving, and that the child who had once flinched now occasionally looked at Uncle Vernon across the kitchen with an expression of mild clinical interest, the way you might look at a weather system, and that the looking made Vernon's collar feel tight in a way he could not explain to Petunia and would not have tried. Once that first winter, Dudley and 2 friends had cornered Harry behind the garages with the loose, grinning cruelty of boys who had never once been told no by anything their own size. And Harry had looked at the 3 of them and done nothing magical, nothing at all, simply stood very still and said, in a voice with no fear in it, "You should think about what happens to you in 10 years if the only thing you ever learned to do was this." And something in the flat certainty of it had made the friends remember they were due home, and Dudley had not been able to look at him over dinner, and Petunia had watched the whole silent transaction across the table and gone the color of a woman who has heard a door open in a house she thought was empty. She came to him later in the dark of the hall while Vernon slept. She had never come to him in the dark before. "What are you?" she said. It was not quite a question and not quite an accusation. "You're like her at the end, Lily, the last summer before she married him. She got quiet like you've gone quiet, like she knew things she wasn't telling. I used to think it was the magic." Her hand was on the cupboard door, not opening it, just resting there. "Is it the magic?" Harry looked at his aunt in the dark, at the long, unhappy face that had spent 11 years deciding he was a punishment, and found that he could not entirely hate her, which annoyed him, because hating her would have been simpler. "It isn't the magic," he said. "It's that I stopped being afraid of you. That's all it ever was. You were never strong, Aunt Petunia. I was just small." He let that sit. "I'm not going to do anything to you. You can sleep, but you're going to spend the rest of your life waiting for me to, and that's not me deciding that. That's you. You built that. Good night." She went back up the stairs without a word, and she never came to the cupboard in the dark again, and that, Harry understood, was the first thing he had ever won by being exactly what he was instead of hiding it. He went on counting down, and the counting had a different quality after that, less like waiting and more like loading. The board Thornwick made him learn was not a metaphor, it was an actual board. It lived in a windowless room the goblins had given over to Harry's use, and on it Thornwick had set out, in carved pieces the size of chess kings, the houses of wizarding Britain that still counted for anything, and over the months Harry had learned to read it the way a general reads ground. "There were the old families your people called the Sacred 28, Thornwick said, with the contempt goblins reserved for anyone who counted his own purity instead of his own gold, and they had sorted themselves over the long peace after the war into 3 rough armies that pretended not to be armies. "Light," said Thornwick, sweeping a gray hand over a cluster of pieces near the center. "Your headmaster's people. They believe in him the way drowning men believe in driftwood, and for the same reason, which is that he has been the thing between them and the dark twice now, and gratitude is the most reliable leash there is. The Weasleys, the Longbottoms, though the Longbottoms are prouder than the rest and follow him by choice rather than habit, which makes them worth more to you than the others, because a house that follows by choice can be made to choose differently." He moved to a darker cluster at the board's edge. Dark. The families who wore the dark wizard's mark and bought their way clean when he fell. Malfoy at the head of them, gold-heavy, patient, respectable now and waiting. They did not stop believing what they believed, they merely stopped saying it aloud and started funding committees instead. Do not mistake their manners for surrender. Manners are what the dark looks like between wars. And the rest, Harry said, he had already found them. The pieces that sat apart from both clusters in the neutral country in the middle of the board. The rest, Thornwick almost smiled. The houses that bowed to no one and burned for no one and are despised by both sides for it, which is the surest sign they are doing something right. Greengrass at the head of them. Old, cold, solvent, and married to nothing but its own survival. The neutral houses are the prize, Lord Potter, and every wizard who ever tried to win them made the same mistake, which was to ask them to pick a side. They will never pick a side, but they will stand behind a thing that is above sides, and there has not been such a thing in 1,000 years, because the only seats that sit above the board have been empty. He set a single piece, taller than the others, at the head of the room, apart where no faction reached. Until now, this piece is you. You do not join an army on this board, you become the high ground all three armies have to come to, make them need you, and you never have to fight any of them. That is the entire game, and your headmaster has been playing it from the wrong square for a century, because he chose to lead the light instead of standing above it, and a thing that leads can be opposed, and a thing that stands above cannot. Harry looked at the tall piece set apart, and at the three armies that did not yet know it existed, and said nothing, and took the shape of it down into the cellar with the rest. There was, that same winter, a different sort of lesson, conducted in a different sort of room. They examined the scar. A cursebreaker named Ognell came up from the deep offices where the bank kept the people it did not advertise, and he was older than Scarnack and quieter than Grindel, and he looked at the thin lightning mark over Harry's eye for a long time without touching it, the way a man looks at a sleeping adder he has been told not to wake. There is a tenant, Ognell said at last, behind this door, and it is not paying rent, and it has been here a long time. He sat back. I will not move against it yet. A thing like this, prized loose without care, takes the wall with it, and the wall in this case is you. But I will tell you what it is, because you have asked to be told true things, and the bank keeps that bargain. When the dark wizard's curse rebounded in that nursery, it did not only break him, it chipped him. A piece came loose, the way a tile comes loose when a roof is struck, and the nearest living thing it could lodge in was the child in the cot, and so it lodged. You have carried a splinter of him over your eye for 11 years, Lord Potter. It is why you dream what you dream. It is very probably why a serpent's ring whispered your name in a language you should not have understood, because the splinter speaks that language, and the splinter is, in the smallest and most unwelcome sense, part of you now. Harry held very still, not from fear, from arithmetic. He was adding a new fact to a long sum and waiting to see what it changed. Can it be taken out? He said. It can be taken out, said Ognell. By the right magic in the right place at the right time, and not by me in this room this winter. The right place, as it happens, is a castle in the north, whose founders built into its deepest stone a thing for cleaning what should not be in a wizard, and whose deepest stone now answers, the auditors tell me, to you. So the door over your eye and the door under that castle are, it turns out, the same problem, and you will open them in the same year when you are ready, and not before. Until then. He inclined his head goblin fashion to an equal. Carry it quietly, it listens. The headmaster has written to the bank, Scarnack told him, the next time the glamour brought him to London. And the bank has answered, and the headmaster has asked for an audience, and the bank has granted it, and you are going to watch it. Not here, watch. Scarnack is of the opinion that an heir should see his enemy negotiate at least once before he is asked to do it himself, and Ravdoc is of the opinion that Scarnack grows sentimental in his old age, and we are both, as it happens, correct. Come. The room they put him in was not a room, it was the inside of a wall. Certain of the negotiating chambers at Gringotts had been built with a second skin, a narrow cavity between the true wall and a false one, and into the false one the goblins had set scrying glass that showed through from the cavity side and showed only stone from the chamber side. We do not spy on our clients, Scarnack had said on the way up with the dryness Harry had learned to read as goblin humor. We observe them. The distinction is legal, and I will not bore you with it. You will stand here. You will make no sound, and you will watch the most powerful wizard in Britain be told no by people who have made an art of it. So Harry stood in the dim cavity behind the scrying glass and watched Albus Dumbledore come into the chamber below. He was taller than Harry had pictured, and older and stranger. The pictures Harry had seen, smuggled out of old newspapers by an obliging clerk, had shown a benevolent grandfather with twinkling eyes. The figure who came through the chamber door had the benevolence and the eyes and the long silver beard, all present and correct, and underneath them something Harry had not expected and could not at once name. The pictures had shown a kindly old wizard. The wizard who actually entered moved through the room as though the room were lucky to have him, and was too well-mannered to say so, and that was a different thing entirely. Grindel was waiting for him. Scarnack stood at Grindel's shoulder. Neither rose. Chief Warlock, Grindel said, you honor the bank. Auditor Grindel. Dumbledore inclined his head, and the courtesy of it was real, which was the trouble with him. Harry was beginning to see the courtesy was always real and never the whole story. Thank you for seeing me on short notice. I will not waste the bank's time, which I know it values above rubies, and being a bank values rubies considerably. I have come about an account, the Potter account. The trust established for the child Harry Potter, of which, as his magical guardian under ministry assignment, I have a natural and continuing interest. You have a letter, Grindel corrected, establishing a ministry assignment of guardianship. The bank has noted the letter. The bank notes a great many letters. I would like, Dumbledore said, settling into the chair that had been set for him, lacing his long fingers in a way that was almost, but not quite, the way Scarnack laced his, to understand the current condition of the account, its holdings, its instructions, any recent activity. I ask not from idle curiosity, Auditor, but because I have reason to believe that something concerning the child has lately changed, and a guardian who does not understand a change cannot protect his ward from it. In the cavity behind the glass, Harry watched the word ward settle in the air. His ward, the child, my ward. He kept his face still and his cellar door shut, which was good practice since no one could see him. Grindel let a silence happen. Goblins, Harry had learned, owned silences the way they owned gold and spent them as deliberately. The bank, Grindel said at last, administers the Potter Trust according to instructions lodged with it by the late James Potter and prior to him by his line. Those instructions are confidential. They are confidential from the ministry. They are confidential from the Wisengamot. They are confidential, Chief Warlock, from you, and your guardianship of the child's person grants you no standing over the child's estate, which is a separate thing administered separately by us. This is not a slight, it is the structure. The structure predates your office. It will, with respect, outlast it. I am aware of the structure. Dumbledore's tone did not change. The twinkle did not leave his eyes, and yet something moved through the chamber that made Harry's skin prickle even 3 feet of stone away. A sense of a vast patience deciding whether to remain patient. I helped to preserve it, Auditor, during the war, when there were those in the ministry who wished to seize goblin holdings under emergency powers, and it was my voice, among others, that stayed their hands. I do not raise this to call in a debt. I raise it so that we understand one another as old allies who have each kept the other's house standing, and who might therefore speak more plainly than the structure strictly requires. It was beautifully done. Harry could see that it was beautifully done. The wizard had, in 4 sentences, reminded the bank that it owed him, denied that he was reminding them, and proposed that the denial entitled him to break the rule he was pretending to respect. If Harry had not spent 6 weeks learning that courtesy and intention were 2 different animals, he might have been moved. Grindel was not moved. Grindel had been refusing powerful wizards since before Dumbledore's grandmother was born. We understand one another perfectly, Grindel said. You wish me to repay an old kindness by violating a confidence. I decline, and I decline in a way that repays the kindness, which is this. I tell you plainly that there is a confidence to violate. A lesser bank would have sent you away believing nothing had occurred. I send you away knowing that something has, and that the bank will not tell you what, and that your knowing this much is the entire extent of the generosity your wartime service has purchased. It is more than you would get from the ministry. It is more than you would get from yourself in our position. Behind the glass, Harry understood that he had just watched a master refuse another master, and that the refusal had been, in its way, a gift and a warning and a closed door all at once, and that Dumbledore had heard all 3. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that surprised Harry, which was difficult because Harry had spent 6 weeks training himself not to be surprised. He smiled, and the smile reached the eyes, and it was tired. You always were the most honest liar I knew, Grindel, Dumbledore said. I mean it as the compliment your people take it for. Very well, I will not ask you to tell me what the bank will not tell. I will instead tell you something, and you may do with it as the structure permits. He leaned forward, and the firelight found the lines of a face that had not slept. 11 years ago, a child was marked by the worst wizard of the age and survived, and the survival cost a great deal, and the bill for it is not yet fully come due. I placed that child where I placed him because the place was protected by magic older and surer than anything I could weave myself. His mother's love made law in his aunt's blood. I have kept him there at the cost of his comfort, which I know and which I have not forgiven myself for, because comfort is a thing a living child can grow into and a dead child cannot. Do you understand me, Auditor? Whatever has changed about that child's estate, I am not here to enrich myself. I have never touched a nut of it, and I never shall. I am here because something woke 6 weeks ago that I have spent 11 years keeping asleep, and if it has woken in him, then he is in danger that you and your structure and your beautiful confidences cannot protect him from, and I can. In the cavity, Harry stood very still. This was the part Ravdoc had warned him about. This was the wizard at his most dangerous, which was the wizard telling the truth. Because it was true, all of it, Harry could hear that it was true, the love and the guilt and the 11 years of vigilance, and it changed nothing about the central fact, which was that this truthful, grieving, brilliant old wizard had decided alone without asking that Harry's life was a thing to be kept asleep, and had built a cupboard to keep it in and called the cupboard protection. Both things were true, that was the trap of him. You could not refute him by catching him in a lie. He did not lie. He simply arranged true things into a shape that ended with you in a cupboard, agreeing it was for the best. Grindel absorbed it without expression. If a danger comes to a client of this bank, Grindel said, the bank will meet it. We are old, Chief Warlock. We have met dark wizards before. We met the last one across a counter when he came to make a withdrawal he had not earned, and we remember the shape of him, and we have not forgotten that he is, by the most reliable goblin reckoning, not as gone as your ministry has painted him. If that is your fear, name it plainly, and the bank will hear it as a banker hears a thing, which is to say, seriously and without sentiment. But you will not buy your way into a confidence with a danger, Chief Warlock, however real. The two are kept in separate vaults here. It is the only way either stays safe. Something passed between them then, old wizard and old goblin, that Harry could not fully read, an acknowledgement that they were speaking around a name neither would say. He took it down into the cellar with the rest, not as gone as your ministry has painted him. He had read the name in the smuggled newspapers, Voldemort, the wizard who had killed his parents and tried to kill him and failed and vanished. The goblins did not think he had vanished. The goblins thought he had merely withdrawn, the way money withdraws, into some account no one could see. That was a problem for later. He had a great many problems being sorted into the order he would solve them in, and that one went near the bottom under 3 years of preparation where it could wait. Then we understand one another, Dumbledore said, rising. The audience was over and both of them knew who had ended it, which was neither of them. The structure had ended it, exactly as Grindel had promised. Thank you, Auditor, for your honesty, your refusal, and your warning. I will take all three, and I will find the child's truth by other roads, because it is mine to protect even when it is not mine to know, and you will forgive an old wizard his stubbornness as you have forgiven him worse. We forgive nothing, Grindel said pleasantly. We record. It is more durable, good day, Chief Warlock. When the door had closed and the wards had confirmed the wizard was 3/4 gone, Scarnack crossed to the false wall and touched it, and the scrying glass cleared, and Harry was looking down into the chamber through plain stone that was no longer plain. Well, said Scarnack, you have seen it now. Tell me what you saw, not what happened, what you saw. Harry took the question seriously because Scarnack's questions were always the test and never the small talk. I saw a wizard, Harry said, who isn't lying and who's more dangerous because of it. He believes everything he said. He believes he's protecting me. And he placed me in that cupboard knowing what it was and decided the cupboard was an acceptable price for the protection, and the worst part is he's right that I'm alive, so I can't tell him he was wrong. I can only tell him it wasn't his to decide, and he doesn't think that's a real objection. He thinks deciding is what love does. Scarnack and Ravdoc exchanged a glance over his head. And what, Scarnack said, do you do with a wizard like that? You don't beat him by proving he's bad. Harry was working it out as he spoke, in the manner he preferred, laying fact against fact. He isn't bad. You beat him by becoming someone he can't decide for. Right now he can decide for me because I'm a secret and a child and a ward and a thing kept asleep. The day I stop being any of those, his whole method stops working, because his method is deciding what's best for people who can't decide for themselves, and it has no setting for an equal. He spent 100 years not meeting equals. I want to be the first one he can't manage. That, said Scarnack, is the correct answer, and it will take you 3 years, and we will spend them. There is also the matter, which you raised and then sensibly shelved, of the wizard in the separate vault. You shelved it correctly. I will tell you only this, so that the shelf does not rot while you ignore it. The bank believes the dark wizard left pieces of himself behind deliberately as insurance against death. We do not know how many. We have reason to believe one of them is closer to you than is comfortable, and we are studying the matter with the discretion it requires, and when you are ready to know more, the bank will have an answer worth the hearing. Until then, it waits where you put it. Now. There is one more thing today, and it is the reason I let you watch and not merely hear. He drew from his coat a small case, and from the case, on a cushion of dark velvet, a single ring. It was old, heavy, a band of some gray metal that was not silver and not iron, and set into it a flat stone the green of deep water, and incised into the stone a serpent that seemed, in the windowless light, to be in slow motion. Harry knew which house it was before Scarnack said the name. Had watched the same green flood the same seal 6 weeks before. Slytherin, Scarnack said, the signet of the second house. I will not let you wear it. We agreed, and the agreement holds. You take the 4 rings together or you take none, and not until you are ready, because the 4 together is a door I cannot pull you back through if it opens wrong. But a true heir may hold a single signet briefly in a controlled room with the bank's own wards braced to catch what spills. We do this for one reason. So that you know in your hand and not on a parchment that the blood told the truth. Hold out your palm. Harry held out his palm. Scarnack tipped the ring into it. For one heartbeat nothing happened, and Harry had time to feel the simple cold weight of old metal on his skin, and to think that perhaps the rings were only rings after all, that the magic had been in the parchment and the stone and not in him. Then the ring recognized him. It was not heat and it was not light. It was a sensation he had no word for and would spend years failing to find one for, a sense of being read, top to bottom, by something enormous and very old and entirely without malice. the way a key is read by a lock that has waited for that exact key for 1,000 years and has finally felt it slide home. The serpent in the green stone moved, truly moved, lifted its incised head and turned it and looked at him out of a carved eye, and somewhere far away in a castle in the north, a stone the size of a coffin shifted a fraction of a degree further toward the new sun it could feel rising and had not yet seen. The ring grew warm in his palm. A whisper of something Harry could almost understand ran up his arm, a language under language, the founders speaking through their own metal to the blood that had at last come to collect. And the word the whisper carried, the only word Harry could make out of all of it, was a name, and the name was his own. Ravdoc's hand closed over his, and the bank's wards braced around them like a held breath, and gently, firmly, she tipped the ring back into Scarnack's case, and the recognition let him go, and Harry stood in the windowless room with the very good light in his palm tingling and his face cellar door composed. "Now you know," Scarnack said quietly. "Not believe, no, that is the difference the months have bought you, and it is worth more than the gold, though I will deny saying so if you quote me to an auditor." He closed the case, the serpent went still in its stone. 3 years, Lord Potter, 3 years, and then you take all 4, and then we find out together whether the wall this castle's founders built can hold a wizard who has spent 11 years deciding you were better off asleep. Go home, sleep in the cupboard one more season. It is the last currency you will ever spend that he set the price on. Harry went home. He slept in the cupboard. And in the dark under the stairs, with the boiler ticking and the green recognition still warm somewhere behind his sternum, he counted down, and the counting had a different quality now, less like waiting and more like loading. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The keystone, the letter, came on a Tuesday, 3 years and 1 month after the blood dried, and Harry read it twice and then laughed, which he did not often do, because the joke was very good and no one but him would ever understand it. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the letter said in green ink, and went on to inform Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, that he had been accepted, and that term began on the 1st of September, and that he should not forget his cauldron. It was signed by the deputy headmistress on behalf of the headmaster, and it was, Harry reflected, the single most expensive piece of paper he had ever held, because the institution that had sent it belonged to him, Locke and Wardstone and Owlery, and it had just written to its own owner to offer him a place, conditional on his remembering his cauldron, and addressed the offer to a cupboard. He had turned 11 the month before. He was taller now, though not tall, and lean in the way of children who had been fed exactly enough and no more, and there was about him a quality the neighbors found difficult to be near, a stillness that did not match the age, the stillness of a thing that has decided what it is and is merely waiting for the world to catch up. The accidental magic had stopped years ago. Nothing around Harry happened by accident anymore. He folded the letter into his pocket. He went out to the garden where the same privet that had hidden Scarnack's first arrival hid his last departure from that house, and he did not say goodbye to the Dursleys, because there was nothing to say that would not have been either a lie or a cruelty, and he had no use left for either. A cab he had paid for himself, with goblin gold from an account that was his, took him to London for the final time as a guest. The next time he came south, he would come as a landlord. Scarnack met him at the silver doors. "You read the letter," Scarnack said, taking in his face, which Harry had not bothered to make composed, because there was no one here worth hiding from. "Good, then you understand the joke, and the joke is the last easy thing today will contain. Come, the chamber is open. The rings have waited 3 years and 1,000 before that, and they are not, in my professional estimation, in a mood to wait an hour more." "You sound nervous," Harry said. "I didn't know goblins got nervous." "We do not," said Scarnack. "We get accurate. Today the accurate thing and the nervous thing happened to wear the same coat. Walk." There was a council before the descent, brief and formal, in the antechamber where the deep cart waited. His 4 tutors had come down to see him off, which they had not arranged and would each separately have denied arranging. Grindel stood at the center, ancient and unbending, Ravdoc beside him, the closed fist. Thornwick had left his carved board upstairs for once, and his hands looked wrong without it, like a smith's hands without a hammer. Atresh, the scarred old fighter, leaned on nothing and watched Harry with the attention of someone who had sent young things into dark places before and not always watched them come back. "We do not, as a rule, gather," Grindel said. "We have made an exception, and we will not discuss it again. There are things each of us would say to you before the arch, and we will say them quickly, because sentiment costs the bank money, and we are, all 4 of us, over budget already." "Thornwick, a point of law," said Thornwick, and the dryness of it steadied the room the way Harry suspected it was meant to. "The moment you wear those 4 rings, Lord Potter, you cease to be a child the ministry can assign a guardian to in matters of estate. An heir paramount in possession is a ward of his own houses, administered by this bank, and that standing overrides a ministry letter the way a deed overrides a tenancy. Your headmaster's claim on your person does not vanish. The blood ward and the guardianship of your body are real, and we will not pretend otherwise. But his claim on your decisions ends today. After the arch, he may advise you, he may not direct you. And the first wizard who tries to tell you that an 11-year-old cannot manage his own affairs will find that the law, for once, is standing on the small one side of the room. Remember that the law is a wall too, and walls do not care how old you are. They care only who holds the deed. "Keep your house," said Ravdoc, which was all she said, and all she had ever needed to say. Atresh spoke last, and he did not soften it, because Harry had asked him 3 years ago never to soften anything, and Atresh kept his bargains. "I have sent the young into the dark before," the old fighter said. "Some of them came back changed in ways they did not choose. The arch will offer you power, and power taken in fear becomes the master and not the tool. So do not take it in fear. Take it the way your mother spent herself, all at once, with the cost known and the choosing done before the door. If you reach for it to stop being afraid, it will own you. If you reach for it because you have already decided who you are, it will be yours. That is the whole of what I know, and I have lived through 2 rebellions to learn it. Go and be the keystone, child. We have carried the wall long enough." There was nothing to add to that, and no one tried. Grindel inclined his head. The cart waited. Harry stepped into it, and Scarnack stepped in beside him, and the 4 who had made him over 3 years stood on the lit landing and watched him fall away into the dark, and not one of them said goodbye, because goodbye was a word for things you did not expect to see again, and the goblins of Gringotts did not, as a matter of policy, expect to lose. They went down. Harry had been into the bank's middle depths 100 times by now, to the windowless rooms with the very good light, but the rooms with the very good light were the shallows, and he understood that the moment the cart took them past the last lit landing and out over the dark. The track ran down into a throat of rock that had never been quarried, only found, and the cart fell along it the way water falls, gathering, and the torches the goblins set in iron brackets came further and further apart until they were not lighting the way so much as marking the places where the dark had once been disturbed and had since closed back over. The deep places of Gringotts were not built. That was the first thing the descent taught. The shallow vaults were masonry-fitted stone, the work of hands. Down here the bank had simply moved into caverns that predated hands, and hung its doors across the mouths of them, and gone no further, because past a certain depth even goblins acknowledged that they were tenants and not architects. A waterfall crossed the track somewhere below, and the cart went through it, and the water, Scarnack had once told him, stripped enchantment and disguise from anyone it touched, washing a wizard down to what he actually was. It touched Harry now and ran off him and took nothing, because there was nothing on him that was not his, and Scarnack watched the water find no purchase and inclined his head a fraction, and they went on down into the cold that has no weather, the patient mineral cold of places the sun has never had an opinion about. The cart stopped where the track stopped, which was at a shelf of stone above a drop Harry could not see the bottom of, and across the shelf, set into the living rock, stood a door. It was not iron, it was not bronze. It was not, as far as Harry could tell, made of anything. It was a place in the rock where the rock had agreed to be a door, a tall, pointed arch filled with a darkness that was not the absence of light, but a substance in its own right, a held black that breathed very slowly, and across the face of it, scored deep into the stone surround, ran 4 shapes Harry knew better than his own name by now. A lion, a serpent, an eagle, a badger. Found all 4 in letters cut by no chisel, a single line in a language Harry had been learning in his sleep for 3 years without knowing he was learning it, and which he could now read, and which said, "The 4 are 1 when the 1 is 4. Enter ere and be known." "No lock," Harry said. "No lock," Scarnack agreed. His voice had gone quiet in a way Harry had heard from him only once in the verification chamber 3 years and a lifetime ago. A lock is for keeping out what does not belong. This door does not keep out, it recognizes and it admits what it recognizes, and it does to everything else what the drop below us does to a falling stone. 3 goblins have stood where you stand, Lord Potter, across the bank's whole history, sent down to confirm the door still held. 2 came back. The door did to the 3rd exactly what it was built to do, which is why we send goblins to confirm it and not to open it, and why I will go no further than this shelf, and why what happens past this arch happens to you alone, because past this arch there is no one in the world but the Founder's magic and the blood it has been waiting for. I cannot advise you in there. No one can. Ravdoc built your house for this. Thornwick built your map for this. Atresh gave you the true account for this. Everything we are is on this shelf, and none of it can cross with you. Do you understand? "Yes," Harry said. "Are you afraid?" It was Grindel's old question, asked in Scarnack's voice, and Harry understood it was a gift, a last reach across a gap that was about to become uncrossable. "Yes," Harry said, because the true account was the only currency that worked down here, and the water below had just proven it. "I'm afraid. I'm going anyway. Those aren't opposites." He looked at the breathing black in the arch. "You said the Founder's magic has nothing to sell me, so it's the only thing down here I can trust completely. I'd rather face that alone than face Dumbledore's kindness with company. Open it." Scarnack looked at him for a moment that held 3 years in it. Then he stepped back off the threshold stone and made a gesture Harry had never seen a goblin make, a hand laid flat over the breastbone, old and formal, a salute between equals across a thing that could not be helped. It is open, Scarnack said. It has been open since your blood dried. You have only to walk through the part of yourself that thinks it might not be. Harry walked into the dark. The dark led him in the way deep water lets in a swimmer, all at once and on every side, and then it was not dark. He stood in a space that had no walls he could find, and a ceiling so far above that it kept its own weather, faint slow lights crossing it like the ghosts of constellations that had set before the first wizard was born. The floor under him was a single sheet of black stone polished to a depth, and in its surface the high lights repeated, so that he seemed to stand on the skin of a still lake with stars beneath as well as above, suspended in a sphere of cold fire. And the space was not empty. At its center, where the lights gathered thickest, 4 seats stood in a ring, facing inward, facing each other across a low round altar of the same black stone, and the 4 seats were occupied, and they were not occupied by the living. They were not ghosts, the way the castle's ghosts were ghosts, the pearly transparent dead who had refused to go on. These were something the founders had left on purpose, impressions of themselves pressed into the deep magic the way a seal presses wax, not the people but the authority of the people, kept here 1,000 years against the hour their blood came back. Godric in the first seat, broad and bright, a figure of banked fire, his outline flickering with a red-gold light that wanted to leap up and be ablaze. Salazar in the second, lean and watchful and green-shadowed, coiled in his chair the way his serpent coiled in its stone. Rowena in the third, tall and still, her presence a cold blue clarity that made the air around her seem to hum at a higher pitch, like a struck glass. And Helga in the fourth, low and broad and unbothered, exactly as her badger had been unbothered, a warm brown weight in the cold sphere, the only one of the 4 whose impression looked at Harry as a grandmother might look at a child come a long way in the snow. It was Helga who spoke, and the others let her, and Harry understood from that alone something about how the 4 of them had arranged the long quarrel of their friendship. "You came," she said, and it was not sound. It arrived in him the way the ring's whisper had arrived under the language in the place where his own name lived. "We wagered on it. Godric said you would come angry. Salazar said you would come clever. Rowna said you would come prepared. I said you would come afraid and come anyway, because that is the only kind of air worth the wall we built. It seems, child, that we were all of us right." "You're not really them," Harry said. He said it to be sure, as he was always careful to be, because being wrong down here would cost more than being wrong anywhere. "You're what they left. The 4 of you arguing in my head is a recording of 4 people who have been dead 1,000 years. A sharp one," said the green shadow that had been Salazar, and there was approval in it. The dry approval Harry had learned to recognize in Scarnack and Grindel, and understood now where the goblins had learned it. "You are correct, and you are correct to insist on it. We are not your ancestors returned. We are the terms of a contract, given voices so that the heir who triggered it would not have to sign in the dark. Ask what you came to ask. We have waited 1,000 years to be asked a good question, and the waiting has made us generous." "Before I take them," Harry said, "I want to ask each of you one thing. You've waited 1,000 years to be asked a good question. I've got 4, one apiece, and then I'll decide. Godric, you built the school's courage into your blood and left it for an heir who might be a coward. What were you afraid of that you'd guard against weakness that hard?" The red gold fire dimmed, which was its version of going thoughtful, of becoming the thing I fought, said Godric. "Every brave wizard FEARSIT, and the liars say they do not. I had killed and found I was good ATIT, and the goodness frightened me more than the killing. So I bound courage into the line and not ferocity, because courage asks whether a thing should be done and ferocity only asks whether it can. You will feel the difference when my gift is in you. Honor it. The world has ferocity enough." "Salazar," Harry turned to the green shadow and did not flinch from it, because he had read the smuggled histories and meant to test them at the source. "They say you hated wizards born to ordinary parents. They say you built a monster under the school to purge them. My mother was born to ordinary parents, so tell me whether the histories are right and tell me true, because if they are, I'll wear your ring last and trust it least." The shadow regarded him, and when it answered there was no heat in it, only the old cold honesty Harry had learned to value above warmth. "The histories are half right, which is the most dangerous thing a history can be," said Salazar. "I did not hate the Muggle-born. I feared the Muggle world, which in my century burned us, and I wished the school closed to children who might run home and lead the fire back to our doors. I was wrong, and I was wrong in the way of frightened clever wizards, which is the worst way, because I built my fear a throne and called it prudence. The monster was real. It was a failsafe I came to regret and lacked the grace to unmake. And my gift is vision into hidden things, and the first hidden thing it will show you is the lie you most want to believe about yourself. Use it on yourself first every morning, and you will not become me." It was not the answer the histories had promised, and it was not entirely an absolution, and Harry trusted it more for being neither. "Rowena, you bound knowledge into your line. What did it cost you?" "Everything it was worth," said the blue clarity, and rang once low. I loved knowing more than I loved any person, and I lost a daughter to it who wanted to be loved more than studied and went where she was and died there. Knowledge is the one gift that will tell you it is enough by itself, and it is lying, and it is the most convincing liar of the four. When my edge is in you, it will offer to be your whole self. Do not let it. That is why HLGA sits beside me in the ring and not across. Someone must. Helga. Harry came last to the warm brown weight, the only one who had looked at him like a grandmother. You won the wager. You guessed I'd come afraid and come anyway. How did you know? Because the other three guessed the air they would have wanted to be, said Helga, and the warmth of her had gone gentle, and I guessed the air the wall would actually need. GODRIC wanted a hero. SALAZAR wanted a survivor. ROWNA wanted a scholar. I have buried a great many heroes and survivors and scholars, child, and what lasts is none of those. What lasts is the one who is afraid and SDAYS and holds the others together while they quarrel. That is loyalty. It is the least glamorous of the four GIFTs and the only one that has never once betrayed its bearer. Take mine last and let it catch the other three, and you will walk out of here whole. Harry stood among the four of them, hero and survivor and scholar and the patient thing that outlasted all three, and understood that they had just told him between them the entire order of operations, and that they had done it as 4 answers to 4 questions because they had spent their lives unable to say a thing plainly when they could say it as an argument instead. Harry looked at the low altar between the 4 seats. On it, in a ring that echoed the ring of the chairs, lay the 4 signets. Lion red, serpent green, eagle blue, and the badger's bread and soil brown, and even unworn, even still, they pulled at the blood in his hands the way the moon pulls water, 4 tides at once, and he understood that taking them was the question and there was no other. What happens to me, he said, if I put them on, all 4, today? Tell me the true account, the way the goblins tell it, with the cost in it and not just the prize. The red gold fire that was Godric flared and laughed, a sound like a hearth catching, and there was love in it, the rough, careless love of a man who had spent his life running toward exactly this kind of question. The true account, said Godric. Good. HELGA was right about you. Here it is then, with the cost in it. We're 4 and we quarreled and we loved one another, and we built a school to outlast our quarrel, and because we knew our HERS might be weak, we bound the strength of each of us into our own blood, a gift and a guard, so that the line would never be the soft place in the wall. 1 heir, 1 gift. That is the easy account, and 100 HERS have taken 1 ring each down the centuries and borne 1 gift each and LIVED. But you are not 1 heir. You are the convergence we dared not plan for and could not forbid, 4 gifts in 1 blood, and here is the cost, boy who asked for it. No one has ever borne 4. We do not know that a living wizard can. The rings will test whether you can hold what we were all of us at once, and if you cannot, the test does not give you a second attempt. That is the price of the whole. The goblins were right to make you wait. They were right that it is a door they could not pull you back through. We tell you plainly so that when you reach for them, you reach knowing. Harry stood on the starred black floor in the cold that had no weather, and did the arithmetic as he always did, as his mother apparently had at the end. The cost was death. The prize was being, finally and completely, beyond anyone's power to decide for him. He had known, walking through the breathing dark, that it would come to something like this. He had not flinched then, and he found he did not flinch now, not because he was brave in the way the storybooks meant, but because the alternative to reaching was a long life of being managed by certain wizards who knew what was best, and he had measured that life against this drop 3 years ago and found that he would rather fall. You said you wagered on how I'd come, Harry said. Godric, Salazar, Rowena, Helga, 4 guesses, 4 of you, and Helga won, so here's mine before I touch them. I think the test isn't whether I'm strong enough to hold all 4 of you. I think a wizard strong enough to hold all 4 of you doesn't exist and never did, and you knew that when you built this because you weren't building it for a strong heir. You were 4 people who couldn't agree on anything except each other. The test isn't strength, it's whether I can do the one thing all 4 of you spent your lives failing at, which is hold things that don't agree all at once without making them fight. He looked from fire to shadow to clarity to warmth. That's the door, isn't it? Not power, reconciliation. You hid the school's whole strength behind the one virtue none of you had and left it for an heir who did, as a joke at your own expense, and a test no liar could pass because a liar would reach for the power and the power would tear him into 4. The sphere of cold fire was silent. The high, slow lights crossed the far ceiling. And then, one by one, the 4 impressions of the founders of Hogwarts inclined their heads to the 11-year-old standing on the stars, and even Salazar's green shadow bent, and Rowena's blue clarity rang once, a single high pure note of something Harry chose to read as delight. ROWNA said you would come prepared, said Helga, and the warmth in her had gone soft with something that in a living woman would have been pride. SHE was right, but she undersold IT, and ROWNA has not been undersold in 1,000 years, so mark the day. You did not come prepared, child, you came understanding, take them. The wall has waited long enough for a keystone that knew it was a keystone and not a crown. Harry stepped to the altar. He reached out both hands over the ring of rings, and he took them all. He had braced for fire. The fire was the smallest part. 4 gifts came into him along 4 channels that opened at once, and the opening was the pain, the brief unspeakable pain of a self that had been 1 room being told it was a house and would now have 4. And Harry held still inside it the way Ravdoc had taught him to hold still in the dark, and let the channels open, and did not fight any of the 4, and did not let any of the 4 fight the others, which was the whole of the test, and he had read it correctly, and it did not make the passing of it easy. Only possible, Gryffindor came first, because Gryffindor could never bear to be anywhere second. It came as heat behind the sternum, and then as something with no analog in an ordinary life, a certainty in the body that the right action and the possible action were the same action, that fear was information and never instruction, a banked courage that was not the absence of fear. Harry understood in the instant it filled him, but the mastery of it, fear made into fuel and fed to a fire that would now never quite go out. His hands, when the heat reached them, wanted to do brave things. He held them still, held the fire, did not let it leap. Slytherin came second, sliding in where Gryffindor's fire had made room, and it was the cold complement of the heat, a sudden depth of vision into the underneaths of things, the hidden joins and the load-bearing lies, the capacity to see a room full of wizards and know at a glance which of them was afraid and which was lying, and where each one had buried the thing he could not afford to lose. It came with the serpent's tongue, the old forbidden language unlocking fully in him at last, every hiss of it now a word, and it came with ambition, a clean cold wanting that frightened Harry more than the fire had, because the fire wanted to act and the cold wanted to win, and he held that still too, and made the fire and the cold look at each other, and would not let them quarrel. Ravenclaw came third and nearly undid him, because Ravenclaw was the one most like what he already was, and the thing most like you is the hardest to keep from drowning you. It came as the blue clarity, the diadem mind, thought sharpened to an edge that could part questions other wizards could not even see were whole, a hunger to know that was indistinguishable from a hunger to live, and for one vertiginous moment Harry felt his own self begin to dissolve into pure cold seeing, a knife so sharp it might cut its own handle, and he reached, in that moment, for the warm brown weight he had been saving. Hufflepuff came last, and Hufflepuff caught him. It came up through the soles of his feet, out of the black stone and the deep rock and the patient mineral cold, a loyalty that was not loyalty to a person but loyalty to the ground itself, to the fact of standing on something that held you, and it took the dissolving Ravenclaw clarity and gave it a floor, and took the leaping Gryffindor fire and gave it a hearth, and took the cold Slytherin wanting and gave it a reason that was not itself. And Harry stood on the stars with all 4 of them open in him at once and not one of them fighting, 4 founders who had failed to do exactly this in life, held in reconciliation at last by the keystone they had built their wall to wait for, and the cold fire of the sphere blazed up all around him into a single white standing column of light, and far away, in a castle in the north, every torch in every corridor flared at once, and the staircases stopped where they were. And a stone the size of a coffin in the deepest cellar finished the slow 1,000-year turn it had begun 3 years before and faced, fully and forever, its risen sun. Hogwarts knew its lord. The wards along its walls, which had answered 100 headmasters out of habit, woke and answered Harry Potter out of blood, and the difference between habit and blood ran through the whole vast living building like a tide coming in, and in his tower office a tall old wizard with a beard like snow set down his teacup very carefully, because his hand had begun to shake. Far to the north the castle changed hands, and the wizard who had run it for 100 years was standing in the wrong room to pretend he had not felt it. Albus Dumbledore set down his teacup. He had felt the wards turn 3 years before, a slow distant pressure, the orientation of a flower toward an unseen sun, and he had spent the 3 years telling himself it was a settling and not a verdict. He could no longer tell himself that. The pressure had become an arrival. Somewhere south the deep magic of the school had found its owner and bent to him completely, and the bending ran up through the foundations and into the tower and into the cup in Dumbledore's hand, and the tea trembled in a ring, and he watched it tremble and did the only honest thing available, which was to admit that he had lost something he had never truly owned and had spent a century forgetting was not his. The door opened without a knock, which meant Minerva, who had earned the right to enter his office the way weather earns the right to enter a field. Albus, her tartan dressing gown, her grey plate, her face gone tight. The staircases have stopped, all of them mid-turn, and the portraits have gone silent, every one, and Peeves of all things is hiding. I have been at this school 40 years, and I have never felt it do this. It is not an attack. It does not feel like an attack. It feels like she stopped because she was a precise woman and would not say a thing she could not stand behind. Like the castle is listening to someone, Dumbledore said. Yes, I know, it is. Listening to whom? And there it was, the question he could not answer and could not refuse, laid on his desk by the one colleague he could least afford to lie to and least intended to. He looked at the trembling tea, going still now as the great change completed itself somewhere below the edge of the world, and he weighed, as he had weighed 10,000 things across 100 years, how much truth the situation could bear. To its owner Minerva, he said at last, very quietly. Hogwarts has an owner, it always did. The founders did not give this school to a headmaster, they lent it to one and reserved the title to their own blood, and for 1,000 years the blood was scattered too thin to claim it, and a succession of headmasters, myself the latest and the proudest, mistook a long loan for a possession. Tonight the loan has been called. Somewhere a child of all 4 founding lines has taken up what was always theirs, and the castle has remembered who it belongs to, and it is not me, and it has not been me for some weeks, and I have been pretending otherwise because the alternative required me to be honest about how much of my certainty was built on a borrowed house. McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. She had known him through 2 wars and a great many griefs, and she heard the thing under the words, which was not fear of losing power but something rarer in him and more dangerous, the fear of having been wrong about the shape of his own life. "A child," she said. "You sound as though you know which child." "I have a suspicion," Dumbledore said, "that I would give a great deal to be wrong about." The instruments that watch a certain house in Surrey began singing a tone they were not built for, on the very day the wards first turned. I have told myself for 3 years that the coincidence meant nothing. He rose and crossed to the window, and looked north over the dark grounds toward the loch and the mountains and the long cold country he had ruled by consent he had imagined was ownership. "On the 1st of September, Minerva, a great many 11-year-olds will come up the lake in the boats, and I will watch them sorted as I have watched 40 years of them sorted, and one of them will be the child I left on a doorstep, and I find I no longer know what I will say to him, because every sentence I have ever prepared began from the assumption that I was the one who would decide. Set the staircases, calm the portraits. And say nothing of this to anyone, because a castle that has found its lord is a fact the ministry must never learn before I understand what manner of lord it has found." She went to do it. He stood at the window a long while after, an old wizard in a house that had stopped being his, learning the particular cold of a man who has just discovered that the most important relationship of his life was a tenancy, and that the landlord was 11 and on his way. It was not finished. There was the splinter. Harry felt the 4 gifts settle into him, 4 rooms in a house that was learning to be a house, and he felt in the new Slytherin depth of his own vision, something in himself that did not belong, a tenant behind a door over his eye, exactly as Ognell had said, and now that the founder's magic was awake in him it could see the splinter too, and the splinter could see it. It woke. The fragment of the wizard who had killed his parents, lodged 11 years over his eye, came suddenly and horribly awake in the column of founder light, and it screamed not aloud in the underlanguage, a thin black thread of pure refusal running through all that white, and it threw itself against the inside of Harry's mind in a panic that was almost pitiable. A splinter of a soul realizing it had nested in a house that had just become a fortress, and Harry felt it claw for the controls of him. For his hands, his tongue, his old fear, and find every door it reached for held shut by a founder, fire and shadow and clarity and the patient brown weight under everything, and it could not take him, and it could not stay easy, and it could not get out. Geodioricius voice or the memory of it in the white, we feel it. The old enemy left a seed in you, and it has grown in the dark, and it is afraid of the light as such things are. We cannot take it here. This vault is for waking the blood, not cleansing it, but mark what you have learned ere. The thing you carry is a piece of him, and he left more than one, and where there is a seed there was a sower, and the sower is not dead. He is thin, he is scattered, he is waiting as we waited for a way back, and the way back he wants most, the prize that would make him whole and more than whole, is the same castle that just bent its knee to you. He wanted Hogwarts before he wanted anything. He wanted to be its heir and was denied, and it broke something in him that was already breaking. Now you hold what he could not earn. Understand what that makes you to him, not a boy who once survived him, a thief, wearing the one thing he wanted, in the one house he cannot enter while you hold the stone. The splinter hurled itself once more against the held doors of him, and failed and subsided sullen and trapped into the dark behind Harry's eye where it would wait, and from where Harry understood with the new cold clarity it might still be useful, a window into the mind of the thing that had made it if he was careful, and he intended to be careful, because he was about to walk into the house he owned and take a seat in front of the wizard who had kept him in a cupboard. And somewhere out in the thin dark a scattered dark lord had just felt the prize he wanted most refuse him forever in favor of an 11-year-old, and that, Harry thought, with the 4 founders quiet and settled and reconciled in him at last, was going to make for an extremely interesting year. He closed his hands. The column of light folded back into the sphere. The 4 impressions of the founders had gone still in their seats, their wager won, their wall keystoned, their long watch ended. And on Harry's hands 4 rings sat where there had been none, already cooling, already his, lion and serpent and eagle and badger, red and green and blue and the color of bread. He walked back through the breathing dark to the shelf where Scarnack waited, and Scarnack took one look at him, at the 4 rings and the 4 gifts and the thing held quiet behind his eye, and did not ask whether it had worked, because the answer was standing in front of him wearing it. "It is done," Scarnack said. His voice was not quite steady, and he did not pretend it was, which was its own kind of respect. You are the first in 1,000 years to walk back through that arch carrying all four. I find I do not have a fee schedule for it, and a goblin without a fee schedule is a goblin improvising, which we do not as an institution enjoy. He looked at Harry a moment longer, and something in the look had changed, the deference a craftsman pays to a finished thing that came out better than the drawing. Where do you wish to go, Lord of all four houses, now that the world is finally arranged the way your blood says it should be? Harry thought of the green ink letter in his pocket, addressed to a cupboard, offering him a place if he remembered his cauldron. North, Harry said. I've been offered a place at a school. I think I'll accept, and then I think I'll go and meet the wizard who's been running my house and find out what he says when he discovers the landlord has enrolled as a first year. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The Founders veto. Harry chose the day with the same care he chose everything, which was to say he chose it the way Thornwick had taught him to choose, by asking not when do I want to act, but when can I least be ignored. The Wizengamot sits on the first Thursday of August, Thornwick said. They were in the board-room, the carved pieces between them, and the four founder pieces no longer stood empty at the head of the table. Harry had set the tall piece there himself, the morning after the vault. It is the dead session. Half the seats are empty, their holders at country houses pretending August does not contain politics. Your headmaster presides as chief warlock over a thin and sleepy chamber, and he uses the dead session to pass the grubby little measures that would not survive a full house. It is the session in which power is least watched and most exercised. It is therefore the session in which a thing that has never happened before should be made to happen, because a sleepy chamber cannot manage surprise, and the whole of our strategy, Lord Potter, is to give them a surprise they cannot manage, and then be the only person in the room who has already finished being surprised. We don't announce me, Harry said. He had decided this weeks ago and was confirming it, which was a thing he did, laying the plan against the goblin to see if the goblin found the seam. An announcement is a thing they can deny, delay, refer to committee. We don't ask the Wizengamot to recognize the four houses. We exercise the seats. We do the thing only the true heir can do in front of all of them, and let the doing be the proof, because a claim can be argued and a fact cannot. Just so. Thornwick's gray hands folded. You cannot sit the seats yourself. You are 11, and the chamber would spend a year litigating your age while the moment rotted. So you will do what every great house does with a minor heir. You will appoint a proxy, and the proxy will carry your voice and your veto, and the proxy will be a person the chamber cannot bully, cannot bribe, and cannot make disappear, which narrows the field considerably. He turned a piece in his fingers. It narrows it, in fact, to one. Gringotts will stand your proxy. Not as a favor, as a fee. The bank has wished for 1,000 years to put a voice inside that chamber and has been forbidden because goblins may not hold Wizengamot seats. But a goblin may speak a wizard's vote if the wizard appoints him, and you are about to appoint him to 4. We will be after 1,000 years of exclusion in the room. You understand that we are not doing this only for you. I've never once thought you were, Harry said. That's why I trust it. Appoint Scarnack. He enjoys watching powerful people be told no, and I want our proxy to enjoy his work. The Wizengamot chamber was a deep amphitheater of tiered benches under a ceiling enchanted to show a slow, dim purple sky, and on the first Thursday of August it was, as Thornwick had promised, 2/3 empty, the remaining members scattered across the dark wood in their plum robes like raisins in a thin pudding. At the high bench sat Albus Dumbledore, chief warlock, in robes of midnight blue, the silver instruments of his office laid before him, presiding over the small, ugly business of a dead session with the patient courtesy of a man who had done it 500 times. The doors opened during the third item, which concerned attacks on imported cauldrons, and a goblin walked into the Wizengamot. This had not happened in the chamber's recorded history, and the chamber did not, at first, know how to react to a thing that had never happened, so it did what unprepared bodies do, which was nothing, a spreading silence that ran up the tiers as plum-robed members turned and stopped mid-whisper and stared. Scarnack crossed the floor of the amphitheater unhurried, in his charcoal wool, carrying a flat case of black leather, and he stopped at the speaking place at the chamber's heart where petitioners stood, and he set the case on the rail, and he waited for the silence to finish arriving because Scarnack understood silences and intended to spend this one well. Chief Warlock, Scarnack said, members of the Wizengamot, I am here to seat 4 members who have been absent for 1,000 years. At the high bench, Dumbledore had gone very still, and Harry, watching through Scarnack's eyes by a goblin scrying link the bank did not advertise and the ministry would have outlawed, saw the exact moment the old wizard understood, saw the long fingers go flat against the wood, saw 100 years of presiding arrive at a thing it had no procedure for. Chair recognizes the representative of Gringotts, Dumbledore said, and his voice was mild, and under the mild it had gone to iron, with the observation that Gringotts holds no seat in this body, and the representative will explain by what right he stands in the petitioner's place, or he will be removed from it. By the right of appointment, Chief Warlock, Scarnack opened the case. He drew out parchment, the heavy old kind, sealed with wax Harry knew the color of. House Gryffindor, House Slytherin. House Ravenclaw, House Hufflepuff, 4 hereditary seats of this body, reserved by the founding charter to the founders, blood vacant these 10 centuries because no blood held them, voted by default and proxied by the chair in their absence. I hold the appointment of their heir to speak their votes. I will lay the verification before the chamber, sealed by the bank, witnessed by the stone, irreversible by law. And I will then exercise on the heir's behalf a power this chamber has not seen used since before this building stood, which the older among you will have read of and the younger will now learn exists. The chamber came apart, not into violence, into noise, the particular noise of a body of powerful people all discovering at once that the floor they had stood on was a lid. Members were on their feet. Someone was shouting that it was a forgery, someone else that the founder seats had lapsed and could not be revived, a thin reedy man in the third tier crying procedure, procedure, as though the word were a charm. And through all of it Dumbledore sat at the high bench and did not shout, and his not shouting was louder than the shouting, and slowly the chamber remembered that the chief warlock had not yet spoken, and turned to hear what he would do with a thing that had never been done. Order, Dumbledore said, and there was order. The representative speaks of a verification sealed by the bank. The chamber will examine it before the chamber decides anything, because a body that votes before it reads is a mob with better robes, and we are not, whatever this August has so far suggested, a mob. He extended a hand. Bring it up. Harry had argued about this part for a week. The verification parchment named him. It had too a claim to the seats that did not name the heir was a claim the chamber could refuse to examine. The moment Dumbledore read the name, the secret Harry had invested 3 years ago would be spent, all at once, in the worst-watched room in Britain, exactly as Scarnack had once warned, except that Harry was no longer the unprepared child who would have been thrown into it. He had decided that the spending was worth the purchase, and the purchase was this: that Dumbledore would learn the truth in a public chamber, on the record, with 50 witnesses, where he could not bury it, soften it, or arrange it into a shape that ended with Harry back in a cupboard, agreeing it was for the best. So Scarnack carried the parchment up to the high bench and laid it before the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and Albus Dumbledore looked down at 4 founders' seals and a name, and the name was Harry James Potter, and Harry watched, through goblin eyes. The most powerful wizard in Britain read the thing he had given a great deal to be wrong about. He did not gasp, he did not pale. He was far too old and far too practiced for the chamber to see anything at all, and the chamber saw nothing. But Harry was not the chamber. Harry had spent 3 years learning to read the difference between courtesy and intention, between the face a powerful person wore and the calculation underneath it, and through Scarnack's eyes, at a distance of 2 feet, Harry saw the old wizard's gaze move across the 4 seals and arrive at the name and stop, and stay, a half-second longer than a glance, and in that half-second Harry watched Albus Dumbledore understand the entire shape of the last 3 years at once. The wards turning, the instruments singing wrong, the staircases stopping, the child on the doorstep who had slept in a cupboard, and was, it turned out, the owner of the house he himself had run, and had been the owner the whole time Dumbledore had been deciding what was best for him. The old wizard set the parchment down. He looked up past Scarnack at the empty air where a scrying link he could not see carried his face to a child in London, and for a moment it seemed he knew exactly who was watching and from where. The verification is genuine, Dumbledore said to the chamber, and the words cost him something Harry could not price and would not forget. The seals are the founder's own. The bank has witnessed it under the stone, which cannot be forged, as every member here knows or should. The 4 seats have an heir. He is a minor, and so he has appointed a proxy, as the law provides, and the proxy stands before us, and the chamber will hear him, because the charter that made this body also made those 4 seats, and a chamber that honors the charter only when it is convenient does not honor it at all. He folded his hands. The iron under the courtesy had become something else, something Harry recognized because he had seen it in himself, the stillness of a person rearranging his entire strategy in real time and refusing to let it show. Representative, you said you would exercise a power not seen since before this building stood. The chamber is, I confess, curious. Name it. The founder's veto, Scarnack said. The reedy man in the 3rd tier stopped crying procedure. The whole amphitheater went, for the second time, completely silent, but it was a different silence, the silence of powerful people learning the exact dimensions of a thing that had just been done to them. On 4 questions named in the charter, Scarnack said into the silence, the 4 founder seats, voting together, may not be overruled by any number of the rest. The questions are these: the admission of students, the appointment and dismissal of the headmaster, the disposition of the castle and its grounds, and the defense of the school in time of war. On these 4 questions, members, the heir of the 4 houses holds a veto that 50 seats cannot break, and he has held it in law since the day his blood was verified, and he holds it now, and he wished me to demonstrate to you that it is not a theory. Scarnack let that land. He will not exercise it today. He wished only that you know it exists and that it is real and that the school you have all assumed belongs to the ministry or to the headmaster or to the vague comfortable everyone that owns nothing and decides everything, belongs in fact to an 11-year-old who has chosen, for now, to let you keep running it. That is the entire message. The bank thanks the chamber for its attention. We will see ourselves out. The establishment tried law first because the establishment always tried law first, and law was the home ground Thornwick had spent 3 years teaching Harry to fight on. It came 9 days after the demonstration as a motion. A member named Corvus Selwyn, who held a bought seat in Malfoy-adjacent sympathies and who moved at the behest of older, quieter wizards who preferred not to be seen, rose in the next session to propose an emergency committee on the validity of dormant hereditary seats. The language was beautiful and bloodless. No one, the motion said, doubted the bank's good faith. It was merely prudent, after 1,000 years, to establish a committee to study whether seats vacant for 10 centuries might be revived without review, and to suspend the exercise of the founder seats pending the committee's findings, which the mover estimated, with visible regret, might require some years. It was, Thornwick murmured, watching beside Harry through the link, a very good move, because it did not attack the air, it attacked the calendar. Suspend the seats pending a committee that ran for years, and the air would be grown and the moment long cold before he could spend what was his. Scarnack rose to answer, and he did not argue the calendar, he argued the stone. The motion proposes to study whether the verification might be invalid, Scarnack said, into a chamber that had learned, over 9 days, to go quiet when the goblin stood. The verification was witnessed by the witness stone of Gringotts, beneath which every inheritance in Britain is sealed, including, members, your own. The stone cannot be doubted in the particular without being doubted in the general. This chamber impanels a committee to ask whether one stone-sealed verification might be false. It has asked whether stone-sealed verifications can be false, and whatever answer it reaches will apply not to the heir alone but to every lord on these benches who holds his seat by the same stone. Every vault, every title, every drop of inherited gold in the country traced, if you follow the thread, to witness the committee will have just declared unreliable. He let it settle, and it settled like frost. The bank invites the mover to proceed. We will cooperate fully with any committee convened to establish that inheritance in Britain is a matter of opinion. We anticipate the cooperation will be brief and its consequences long, and that not one wizard in this room will still hold what he holds on the morning the committee reports. Corvus Selwyn discovered an urgent reason to withdraw his motion. It was the next part that taught Harry the most, and it taught him about Dumbledore. The chief warlock could have let the motion live. A committee that froze the founder seats for years was the single most useful thing the establishment could have handed him, a lawful cage for the power that had walked into his chamber and his castle, and unsettled a century of certainty. He had only to allow the debate, to let the calendar do quietly what he was too principled to do loudly. Instead, Albus Dumbledore ruled the motion out of order, on precisely the ground Scarnack had laid, before the chamber could even vote on whether to hear it, and he did it in 4 dry sentences about the indivisibility of the witness stone, and in doing so he closed, with his own hand, the one door through which he might have slowed the child who had come to take his school. He chose the structure over his own advantage, Harry said quietly, watching the old wizard rule against his own interest. Again. He keeps doing that every time he has a chance to win dishonestly. He takes the honest loss instead. He turned the fact over as he turned everything over in his hands. That's not weakness, and I'd be a fool to read it as weakness. It's the most dangerous thing about him. A wizard who will cheat is a wizard you can corner with his own cheating. A wizard who won't is a wizard you have to beat clean in the open with the rules he refuses to break standing between you. He just gave away a year-long advantage to keep his hands clean. I'm going to have to take this castle from someone who would rather lose it fairly than keep it by a trick, and I don't yet know whether that makes the job easier or impossible. The chamber could not keep a secret because a chamber is 50 people and 50 people are a sieve, and by morning the Daily Prophet had what 50 people always leak, which was the shape of the thing without the sense of it. Heir of the Founders rises, the headline said in the largest type the paper owned, and underneath, in smaller letters that managed to be both breathless and afraid, ancient SEATS claimed, veto over Hogwarts itself, identity of heir a ministry secret. They had the founder seats and the veto and the word Hogwarts, and they did not have the name, because the only copy of the name was sealed at Gringotts and the bank did not leak, and so the wizarding public spent a fevered week guessing, and the guesses were uniformly wrong, and Harry let them be, because a public busy guessing is a public not yet organized against you. The Minister for Magic wanted to meet him. Cornelius Fudge's overture came wrapped in the lime green of a personal letter, all warmth and concern in the repeated word stability, and it proposed a quiet luncheon at which the minister might offer the young heir the friendship and guidance of the ministry during what must, the letter suggested 3 separate times, be a confusing period. Harry read it twice as he read everything and handed it to Scarnack, who read it once because Scarnack had read 1,000 of them. He wants to be photographed standing next to you, Scarnack said, before anyone else is. He wants the public to see the minister and the heir of the four houses side by side so that the public files you without thinking under things the minister has handled. It is the cheapest move in the game and it works on nearly everyone because nearly everyone is flattered to be wanted by power and the flattery does the rest. Decline it, Harry said, politely. Tell him the heir is grateful for the ministry's concern and looks forward to a correct and respectful relationship between his houses and the ministry, conducted in writing at a pace that allows for proper consideration. Make it so courteous he can't be offended and so cold he understands exactly what it means. Which is, that he doesn't manage me either. None of them do. That's the whole message, and I'm going to send it to each of them in the language they'll feel most. Fudge gets courtesy. Malfoy got candor, Dumbledore-esque going to get something else. Harry set the lime green letter down. The thing they all assume is that an 11-year-old needs an adult to stand behind. Every one of them is auditioning for the role. I'm going to spend this whole first year declining the role, one applicant at a time, until the wizarding world rebuilds its picture of me around the fact that I don't have a handler and can't be given one. That picture is worth more than any of the friendships they're offering because it's the picture that makes the friendship sincere. There was one letter he did not decline and it surprised him, which was difficult to do. It came on plain heavy paper in a firm old hand, and it was from Augusta Longbottom, dowager of a house that followed Dumbledore by choice and not by habit, and it did not offer friendship or guidance or a photograph. It offered, in 4 dry sentences, respect. The heir of the 4 houses had demonstrated a power and declined to use it, Madame Longbottom wrote, and restraint in the young was rare enough to be worth a note from the old. Her grandson would be in Harry's year. She made no request and extended no invitation. She wished merely for the heir to know that there existed at least one ancient house that judged a wizard by what he refrained from doing, and that house would be watching, with neither suspicion nor expectation, which were the only terms on which her house watched anyone. Harry kept that letter. He declined all the others and kept that one, and could not entirely have said why, except that it was the first message he had received from the wizarding world that wanted nothing from him, and a wizard learns to mark the people who want nothing, because they are the only ones whose later wanting can be trusted. Albus Dumbledore wrote to him on the 4th day, and the letter came the way everything came to Harry now, through the bank, examined and unsealed and read by goblins before it reached him, because a wizard who could enchant ink was a wizard whose letters you did not open with your own hands until someone less valuable had opened them first. It was a good letter. That was the trouble with it, the same trouble as the wizard who wrote it. He did not, Dumbledore wrote, intend to insult the heir of the 4 houses by pretending he had only now learned the heir's name. They both knew when he had learned it, and from whose hand, in whose chamber, and the pretense would dishonor them both. Nor did he intend to defend the choices of the last 11 years, because some choices could not be defended to the person they had most cost, only explained. An explanation offered as defense was merely a cleverer way of asking to be forgiven, and he would not insult the heir with cleverness either. He wrote, he said, for one reason only. To say that he had been wrong about a great many things and right about one, and that the one was this, that the child he left on a doorstep was loved and remained loved by parents who had died for him and by an old wizard who had failed him, and that the failure did not unmake the love, however little the love was now worth to the wizard it had failed to protect. He asked for nothing. He proposed no meeting. He signed it simply Albus with no titles, which from a man who held more titles than anyone alive was the loudest thing in the letter. Harry read it 4 times. He's good, he said finally to Grindel, who had brought it up himself, which Grindel did not do for ordinary letters. He apologized without defending himself, which means I can't attack the defense. He claimed the love, which means if I reject it I look cold, and if I accept it I'm back inside his frame, the orphan and the grieving grandfather, and that frame ends with me forgiving him, and forgiveness is just permission to be decided for again. And he asked for nothing, which means there's nothing in the letter to refuse. It's a perfect letter. It's a door with no handle that somehow you still walk through. He set it down. He's been doing this for 100 years. I've been doing it for 3. I'm not going to win this one by writing a better letter. Then do not write a better letter, said Grindel. Write a true one. You have spent 3 years learning that the true account is the only currency these wizards cannot counterfeit. He sent you a masterpiece of sincerity. Answer it with something he cannot do, which is brevity without warmth, because warmth is the one tool he has mastered and the one you are under no obligation to pick up. So Harry wrote back, and his letter was 3 sentences, and it took him an hour. Headmaster, he wrote, choosing the title precisely, because Albus had dropped his titles and Harry intended to hand one back. I believe that you loved me and that you left me in a cupboard and that you have spent 11 years unable to see that those 2 facts do not cancel. They simply both stay true, which is the hardest arithmetic there is and the one you have never learned. I am not coming to school to forgive you or to fight you. I am coming because it is my house, and I have decided to live in it, and you happen to work there." Harry kept the third sentence the coldest on purpose, and then he signed it not Harry and not Lord Potter but Potter, the way a wizard signs who is neither a child to be comforted nor appear to be flattered but simply a name that owns the building, and he sealed it, and he sent it north, and somewhere in a tower 100 years of certainty read 3 sentences and understood that the easy version of this had ended. Lucius Malfoy came to Gringotts 2 days later, which was exactly as long as Harry had calculated it would take a clever, ambitious man to decide that a new power in the world was a thing to be courted before it was a thing to be feared. He came in robes that cost more than the Dursleys' house, with a silver-headed cane he did not need to walk with, and he was beautiful in the cold way of a blade laid on velvet, and he had requested an audience with the heir's proxy and been granted instead an audience with the heir, because Harry had decided that Lucius Malfoy was a wizard who should be made to negotiate with a child, since nothing would unbalance him more. They met in a chamber the bank kept for exactly this, all dark wood and one lamp, and Harry sat in a chair that was still too big for him and did not pretend otherwise, and Lucius Malfoy looked at the 11-year-old who owned Hogwarts and arranged his face into warmth. Lord Potter, a bow precisely calibrated, deep enough to flatter and shallow enough to remind them both that he was a grown wizard of an ancient house and Harry was a child. Or do you prefer one of the older titles? It must be a novelty having 4 to choose from. I came to offer the congratulations of House Malfoy and its friendship, which is not a thing my house offers lightly or often. You came, Harry said, because 2 days ago you learned that the child your master tried to kill turned out to own the one thing your master wanted most, and you're trying to work out whether that makes me your enemy, your opportunity, or your insurance. You haven't decided. That's why you're here. You're here to gather the information you need to decide what I am to you. He let the lamp sit between them. I'll save you the trouble. I know about the mark on your arm, Mr. Malfoy. I know what you were and what you bought your way out of being. And I know that you're sitting across from me calculating whether your old master, if he came back, would reward you for befriending me now or for betraying me later, and the honest answer is that you don't know which way he'd jump, and neither do I, and that uncertainty is the only thing keeping this conversation civil. The warmth on Lucius Malfoy's face did not crack. It simply stopped being warmth and went on looking exactly the same, which was, Harry thought, the most expensive skill he owned. You are remarkably direct, Lucius said softly, for a child. I'm remarkably direct for anyone. The child part just makes it harder for you to hit me for it. Harry leaned forward an inch. Here, what I'm offering since you came for an offer. I'm not asking House Malfoy to love me. I'm not asking you to abandon your politics or your committees or your patient, respectable funding of the things you fund. I'm telling you that there are exactly 2 futures. In one, your old master comes back, and I am the wizard who holds the castle he needs and the 4 seats he can't break, and you spent the years before his return as my open enemy, and when he loses, because he will lose, you lose with him. In the other, you're publicly, boringly correct toward the heir of the 4 houses. You owe me nothing and I owe you nothing, and when your master comes back and finds you have made no move against me, you can tell him truthfully that you were keeping your enemy close. Both futures cost you nothing now, only one of them survives him. I'm letting you pick the one that keeps your son's inheritance intact. You should thank me. I'm being generous, and I won't be again. Something moved behind the gray eyes, and it was not warmth and it was not anger. It was the recalculation of a wizard who had walked into a room expecting to manage a child and was discovering that the child had already mapped the room, the exits, and the wizard. Lucius Malfoy rose. He bowed again, and this time the depth of it was different, recalibrated to a power he had reassessed. House Malfoy, he said, will be correct toward the heir of the 4 houses, boringly so as you put it. He paused at the door. You are going to make a great many enemies, Lord Potter, with that mouth. I'm going to make a great many enemies regardless, Harry said. I'd rather they be enemies who know exactly where they stand. Give my regards to your son. I'll be meeting him at school. Daphne Greengrass's father did not come to Gringotts because the Greengrasses did not come to people. People came to the Greengrasses, and that, Thornwick said, was precisely why they were worth having. So Harry went to them, to a cold, handsome house in the cold, handsome country north of London, and was received in a parlor by Cyrus Greengrass, a lean grey wizard with his daughter's pale eyes, who did not offer warmth because he did not trade in it, and who looked at Harry across a tea service neither of them touched with the frank assessing interest of a man examining a new and significant variable. You exercised the founder's veto in a dead August session, Cyrus said without preamble, because the neutral houses did not waste words on weather. You did not use it. You demonstrated it and withdrew. That was not the move of a child, Lord Potter, and it was not the move of the bank, whatever the bank would like the chamber to think. The bank would have used it. The bank has wanted into that chamber for 1,000 years and would not have shown restraint on the day it finally got in. The restraint was yours, so I find myself in the unusual position of being interested in an 11-year-old, and my house is not often interested, and you should understand that our interest is the most valuable currency we possess, and we are spending some on you now, which obliges you to be worth it. You're neutral, Harry said. Your house has survived every war by belonging to no one. And you're worried because a power that sits above all sides is more dangerous to a neutral house than a power that picks one, since a neutral house can balance between two armies but has nowhere to stand when one of them becomes the sky. He met the pale eyes. I'm not here to make you pick a side, Mr. Greengrass. I'm here to be the side that doesn't ask you to. I hold 4 seats that can't be overruled, and I'd rather hold them with the neutral houses standing behind me by choice than rule over them by force, because force is what Dumbledore's faction does and what my parents' killer did, and I've watched where both of those roads end. You want a power above sides that doesn't crush the wizards who stayed out of the fight. So do I. That's not an alliance. It's just 2 parties who happen to want the same wall to stand. Those are the only alliances worth having. The rest are leashes. Cyrus Greengrass looked at him for a long moment, and then he did something Harry suspected Cyrus Greengrass did perhaps twice a decade. He poured the tea. My daughter is your year, Cyrus said, filling the second cup. Daphne. She is cold and clever, and she has been raised to trust no one, which means that if she ever decides to trust you, it will be the most considered decision of her life, and worth 10 of the friendships you will be offered by warmer, stupider children. I make no promises on her behalf. She would never forgive me, and rightly. I say only that House Greengrass will watch the heir of the 4 houses with interest rather than suspicion, which from us is nearly an embrace. Drink your tea, Lord Potter. You have done a great deal of frightening today, and you are still, under all of it, a child who has not eaten, and even the neutral houses observe the courtesy of feeding the dangerous before sending them back into the cold. There was one more briefing before the boats, and Grindel gave it himself, in the deep office where the bank kept the things it did not advertise. You should know what your headmaster has hidden in your house, Grindel said, since he did not ask your leave to hide it, the leave not being his to need 11 years ago and being very much yours to grant now. He laid a single sheet on the desk, a cursebreaker's report in the bank's cramped hand. This summer a vault was emptied here at our own bank, Vault 713, on the headmaster's authority, the day before persons unknown attempted to enter it. What it held has since been moved north into the school, behind a set of protections assembled by the staff like a charity bake sale of dangerous spells, each teacher contributing a layer. The thing they are guarding, Lord Potter, by every indication the bank can assemble, is the Philosopher's Stone, the work of Nicholas Flamel. One object in the known world that produces the elixir of life and turns base metal to gold, which is why I will note the bank takes a professional interest in its whereabouts, gold being our native tongue. Harry looked at the report. He did not need the Slytherin vision to see the shape of it. The shape was plain. He moved the most dangerous object in Britain, Harry said slowly, into a building he doesn't own, behind defenses I didn't approve, without telling the wizard who holds the wards. If anything goes wrong, it goes wrong inside my house to my students, on a risk I never agreed to take. He looked up. He's still doing it, even now, even after the chamber, after my letter. He's still deciding what risks my house will carry, because in his head it's still his school and I'm still a complication to be managed. That's not malice. That's worse than malice. Malice you can negotiate with. This is just 100 years of assuming the building came with the job. And the why of it, Grindel said. Why hide a thing that produces eternal life and infinite gold inside a school full of children? There's only one reason worth the risk. He is using it as bait. He has reason to believe the Dark Wizard wants it badly. Wants it because a thing scattered and bodiless across too many hiding places needs exactly 2 things to return whole, a life to drink and a body to drink it into, and the stone offers both. So your headmaster has set the stone in the center of your house like a baited trap, and he is waiting in your corridors for the dark to come and spring it, and he has not told you, because telling you would mean admitting that the trap and the bait and the children all sit on ground that answers to your hand and not his. Harry sat with it. The 4 founders were quiet in him. The splinter was quiet behind his eye. And the whole year arranged itself at last into a single clear picture, a baited trap in a house he owned, set by a wizard who would not admit the house was his, to catch a dark lord who wanted the same house and the bait both, while 1,000 children slept on top of all of it. Then I'm not going to school, Harry said. I'm going to the place where all 3 of them have agreed to have the fight, and I'm the only one of the 3 who actually holds the ground they're fighting over. He stood. Let them spring their traps. I'll be the one thing none of them planned for, the owner in the building, awake. The dark thread surfaced the night before Harry left for Hogwarts, and it surfaced through the splinter. He had learned over the summer to listen at the door behind his eye without opening it, the way you might press an ear to a wall to hear the neighbors. The fragment was a window, as he had suspected in the vault, a thin, contaminated window into the scattered mind of the thing that had made it, and most nights it showed him nothing but the dull red dark of a soul stretched too thin across too many hiding places. But that night it showed him a corridor he half recognized, torchlight on old stone, and a turbaned figure moving through it, and under the turban a second face that should not have been there, and a hunger coming off the doubled wizard that Harry knew, because the splinter knew it, because it was the same hunger that had made the splinter. He came back to himself in the dark of his room above the bank, where Scarnack had given him quarters for the summer, and he sat very still, and then he wrote 3 words on a piece of parchment and sealed it and gave it to the night clerk to carry to Grindel. The 3 words were, "He is inside," because Harry had recognized the corridor. He had studied the maps for 3 years, every passage and stair of the castle he owned, and he knew the stone in that vision as surely as he knew his own hands, and the turbaned wizard with the second face had been walking the 3rd-floor corridor of Hogwarts, inside the wards, inside the school, carrying a piece of the thing that had killed Harry's parents folded into the back of his own skull, and the wards had let him in because the wards had let him in before Harry held them. On a contract of employment signed by a headmaster who had not known what he was hiring. So that was the shape of the year then. Harry would go up the lake in the boats and be sorted, and take a seat as a first year in the school he owned in front of the wizard who had run it, and somewhere in its corridors a fragment of a dark lord would be wearing a teacher and waiting for a way back to wholeness, and the way back it wanted most was the very castle that had bent its knee to Harry in the vault. 2 claimants, 1 castle, one of them held the deed and the wards and the founder's magic, the other held a teacher's body and a patient's that had survived its own death. Harry looked north toward the school and felt the 4 founders settled and quiet in him, and the splinter sullen behind his eye, and the long cold game finally narrowing toward the board where it would be decided. "Good," he said to the dark, to no one, to the thing behind his eye that might have been listening. "Come and try to take it. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to make me use what I am." Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The unsorted Lord. The Hogwarts Express was a red engine and 11 coaches and 1,000 children, and it belonged to Harry, which he had confirmed in the deeds the week before, because the school's charter included its rolling stock, and he had found it satisfying in a small, dry way to ride to his own school on his own train among children who thought they were going to a place that belonged to everyone and no one. He took a compartment near the rear and did not fill it with the bright, loud first-years who traveled in packs for safety. He sat alone at first and watched the country slide from city to suburb to the long green emptiness of the north, and he was not alone for long, because power draws company the way a window draws moths, and the first of the company knocked before sliding the door, which told Harry something about her before she said a word. "There's no room anywhere else," said the girl, which was a lie, and both of them knew it was a lie, and she let him see that she knew, which was the interesting part. She had pale eyes and a cold, composed face, and she carried herself like furniture that had been in the family 300 years. "That is not true. There is room everywhere else. I came to look at you because my father came home from a cold house in the north and poured tea he had not meant to pour, and I have spent the summer wondering what an 11-year-old could possibly have done to make Cyrus Greengrass pour tea. I am Daphne. I have decided to find out by the direct method, which is to sit here and watch." "Sit then," Harry said. "I warn you, it's mostly watching the country go by. The interesting parts happen later." She sat. She watched the country go by. She was, Harry decided, restful in the way of people who did not require entertaining, and he had met very few such people, and he marked her as a thing to keep. The second of the company did not knock, because the second of the company was towing a toad and an apology in roughly equal measure. A round-faced boy half fell into the doorway, caught himself, went red, and said, "Sorry, have you seen a toad? I keep sorry," and would have fled, except that Harry had read a letter that summer from a house that judged wizards by what they refrained from doing, and he had a guess about whose grandson this was. "Longbottom," Harry said. It was not quite a question. The round face came up, surprised. "Your grandmother wrote to me. She has a very firm hand and a very low opinion of flattery, and I liked her letter more than any other I got all summer. Sit down. Your toad S under the seat opposite. It's been there since reading. Daphne, this is Neville Longbottom, of a house that follows Dumbledore by choice, which his grandmother wants me to know makes them worth more than the ones who follow by habit, and she's right." Neville sat, partly because there was nowhere else to go and partly, Harry suspected, because being named correctly by a stranger was a novelty he wanted to examine. He retrieved his toad. He looked at Harry with the wary hope of a child who had been overlooked his whole short life and was not certain that being seen was safe. "You're him, aren't you?" Neville said. "The heir, the 4 houses. Gran said not to fuss at you. She said you'd had enough wizards fussing at you to last a life." "Your grandmother," Harry said, "is the only adult in Britain who has correctly identified the one thing I want, which is for people to stop fussing at me. Tell her I said so. It'll please her, and she'll pretend it doesn't, and that's the most honest kind of pleased there is." The 4th visitor arrived because Neville's toad had not, in fact, stayed put, and the girl who returned it did so with the air of a barrister presenting evidence to a slow jury. "Is this yours?" It was 3 doors down, terrorizing a second year. She had a great deal of brown hair and a great deal of certainty, and a voice that had spent its first 11 years being the cleverest in every room and being disliked for it. You really should keep track of him. A toad is a responsibility, not an accessory. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the set books twice in Hogwarts, a history 3 times, and not one of them mentions. She stopped because she had finally looked past the toad to the rings and to the way the other 2 children sat arranged around Harry like moons around a planet. Any of this, the train is full of it. They're saying there's an heir of the founders. That's you, isn't it? That's actually a real thing and not a story. It's a real thing, Harry said. Sit down, Miss Granger. You've read Hogwarts, a history 3 times, which means you're either the most prepared person on this train or the most frightened, and the interesting thing about you is that I can't yet tell which, and I'm rarely unable to tell. He watched her decide whether that was an insult. It wasn't an insult, it was a compliment with the wrapping off. Your parents aren't magical. Dentists, Hermione said, lifting her chin, braced for the thing she had clearly already been told twice on the train by children raised to say it. Both of them. Is that going to be a problem? People keep implying it's going to be a problem. My mother was born to people who weren't magical, Harry said. One of the 4 wizards whose houses I hold spent his whole life believing that made her a danger to be kept out, and he was wrong, and he told me so himself, and I trust the dead founder who admitted his mistake more than the living children repeating it. So no, it isn't going to be a problem, not on a train that belongs to me. He let her sit with that and watched her file it the way Thornwick filed precedents, carefully for later use. Ask me a real question, you've got one. You've had it since you saw the rings. People who read books 3 times always have a real question and waste it being polite. Don't. Hermione Granger looked at him, and the bossiness fell off her like a coat she'd only been wearing because the room was cold, and underneath it was the thing Harry had been hoping to find, a mind that wanted to know more than it wanted to be safe. All right, she said, if you own the school, if it's actually yours, the wards and the deed and everything. Then why come as a student at all? You could just live here, you could change anything you wanted. Why sit exams and get told off for running in corridors that belong to you? Because the fastest way to be wrong about a thing, Harry said, is to rule it without understanding it, and the fastest way to understand a school is to be a student in it. I didn't come to own Hogwarts, I came to learn it. There's a difference, and you're the first person on this train to see there might be. He glanced at Daphne, who was watching Hermione with her cold, pale, assessing eyes, and at Neville, who was watching with open friendliness, and back at the brown-haired girl bristling with unwasted questions. Keep that in mind, Miss Granger. People are going to spend 7 years trying to grind it smooth because a sharp girl frightens them. Don't let them. It's the best thing you own, and unlike my castle, no one can inherit it out from under you. The third arrival was the one Harry had been expecting, because Lucius Malfoy had promised correctness, and Lucius Malfoy was a man who kept the promises that cost him nothing, and his son arrived to deliver one. Draco Malfoy slid the door open with 2 larger boys behind him, took in the compartment, and performed with the careful artistry of a child who has been rehearsed, a bow that was exactly correct. Lord Potter, Draco said. House Malfoy presents its respects to the heir of the 4 houses. It was stiff, it was clearly recited, and under the recitation in Draco's gray eyes, Harry could see the war his father had set him, the pure-blood pride that wanted to sneer at the cupboard-raised orphan, held in check by an instruction from a parent he feared more than he wanted to sneer. Respects received, Mr. Malfoy, Harry said, and watched the relief that the encounter had a script. Tell your father the heir noticed that House Malfoy was correct, and that the heir notices everything, which he should consider both a courtesy and a warning. You can go. We'll be in different houses, you and I, and we'll spend 7 years pretending that means we're enemies and we don't have to start today. Draco went with his 2 large shadows, and Daphne watched him go with her cold, pale eyes and said, You frighten people very precisely. It is almost a craft. It is a craft, Harry said. I had good teachers. The castle came into view across the black loch at full dark, and Harry, who owned it, who had studied every map of it for 3 years, who had felt it bend its knee to him in a vault under London, looked at Hogwarts for the first time with his own eyes and found that the maps had been lying by omission, because no map can show you that a thing is alive. It stood on its crag, a mountain that had decided to become architecture, towers stacked on towers and lit windows scattered up the dark like embers thrown against a cliff, and it was the most beautiful thing Harry had ever seen, and the most his, and the 2 facts arrived together and he held them together, the way Helga had taught him to hold things that did not cancel. The boats crossed themselves. That was the first sign, and only Harry saw it for what it was. The little boats that carried the first years were charmed to row themselves, every year, the same gentle pace across the same black water. This year, the boat carrying Harry pulled ahead. It did not mean to, the charm did not change. The boat simply found itself moving faster, eager, the way a dog quickens on the last stretch home, and the other boats lagged behind it without their charms altering at all, and the lake itself went smooth in front of Harry's bow and rough behind it, the water arranging a road for its owner without being asked. Daphne beside him noticed that they were pulling ahead and looked at the water and then at Harry and said nothing, because she was a greengrass, and the greengrasses had survived 300 years by knowing which things to say nothing about. The great doors of the castle stood shut when the first years came up from the boats, as they stood shut every year, waiting for the staff to open them with the small ceremony of welcome. They opened before anyone touched them. They opened for Harry, both leaves swinging wide and silent on hinges that had shrieked for 1,000 years, opening the way a house opens to the one who pays for its repair. And the warmth and light and noise of the entrance hall spilled out across the wet steps, and the assembled first years hesitated because doors were not supposed to do that. And a stern witch in emerald robes who had come to meet them stood in the new-made gap with an expression Harry could not read at that distance and would understand later. Because Minerva McGonagall had felt the staircases stop in July and had spent the summer being told nothing, and she was looking at the children on her steps and trying to work out which of them the castle had just bowed to. First years, she said, recovering because she was very good at her work. Welcome to Hogwarts, follow me. The sorting was a relic, and Harry was a relic's lord, and the two facts met in front of the entire school. He had read about the hat. Thornwick had explained it as a legal instrument, which it partly was. A 1,000-year-old enchanted object that the founders had made by pooling something of each of themselves into it, so that it might sort the children when they were gone, and Harry had understood reading that the sorting hat was not a quaint tradition but a founder relic, a piece of the four of them, kin to the rings on his fingers and the wardstone in the cellar, and he had wondered on the train what a piece of the founders would do when it met the founders' heir. He found out near the end of the alphabet, after he had watched 100 children try the hat on, after Daphne had gone to Slytherin with a cool nod and Neville to Gryffindor with a startled one, and Draco to Slytherin with a sneer. He had earned the right to by waiting until Harry was not watching. McGonagall read his name from the scroll, Potter Harry, and the hall did the thing halls did at that name, the spreading whisper, the craning, the children who had grown up on the storybook version turning to see the child from the tale. Harry walked to the stool through all of it without hurrying and sat, and McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head and the brim came down over his eyes and the inside of the hat was waiting for him. It did not speak into his ear the way it spoke to other children. It spoke into the place under the language, the place the rings spoke to, the place the founders had spoken to in the vault, and its voice was 4 voices braided into one and then startled apart. "Oh," said the hat, and for the first time in 1,000 years of sortings the hat was surprised. "Oh, it is you, they said you might come." The 4 of Them, when they poured themselves into me, each left a note for the heir who would hold all 4, and I have carried 4 notes for 1,000 years waiting for a head Thui fit, and here you are, and I find I do not know where to put you, because you are not a student to be sorted. You are the hand that made the houses. Where does one sort the founder of the sorting? You're a piece of them, Harry said silently into the dark under the brim. Like the rings. Like the wardstone, your family in a strange metal way. So tell me, since you're the only piece of them that gets to watch every year what the houses became, where do I belong? Not where's convenient, where's true. I'll trust a founder relic over my own preference because I came here to own this place honestly, and that starts with letting it tell me the truth about myself. The hat was quiet a moment, and in the quiet Harry felt it do the thing it did, the rifling, the reading, except that where it read other children in seconds it read Harry slowly, with care, the way you handle a letter from someone you have loved and lost. Godrics courage is in you, the hat said, and it is real, for you walked into a vault that kills the unworthy. Salazar's cunning is in you, and it is deep, for you turned a secret into a throne and made 4 armies need you before they knew you existed. Rownas mind is in you, sharp enough to have read the test in the vault that no one read in 1,000 years. And Helgas loyalty is in you, the rarest, for you held all 4 of them together without letting them fight, which is the one thing they could never do. You are all 4 houses, child, fully and truly, and that is precisely why I cannot sort you into one, for to put you in one would be to tell a lie about you, and I have never once lied in 1,000 years, and I will not begin with my own lord. Then say so, Harry said, out loud to the whole hall. Tell them the truth, since you can't lie. I'd rather start with the truth than with a house. Are you certain? The hat said. It will change everything. They will never again see a student when they look at you. They were never going to see a student, Harry said. They were going to see the storybook boy and the cupboard orphan and the 4-house heir and a dozen other stories that aren't me. Let them see the true thing instead. The true thing is the only one I can actually defend. And the sorting hat, the relic of the founders, the only object in the castle older than the quarrel and wiser than the wizards, lifted its voice and spoke aloud to the great hall of Hogwarts, in a tone no living student had heard it use, a tone of formal proclamation. I cannot sort this child, the hat announced, and the hall went silent the way the Wisengamot had gone silent. All at once every fork stopped, for he belongs to no one house. He belongs to all 4, and all 4 belong to Him. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin. I name Him heir of the founders and lord of this castle, and I return Him to his own hall unsorted, for there is no hat in the world with the standing to sort the wizard who owns the hat. Into the silence the hat had made, 1,000 children and 40 teachers looked at the small, unsorted figure on the stool, and at the high table the staff of Hogwarts arranged themselves, each according to his nature, into the response the moment demanded. Harry catalogued them while they thought he was only sitting, the half-giant near the end with his face open and astonished. The greasy dark-robed master at the center, whose face had locked down so fast and hard that the locking was itself a tell, a wizard with reasons to fear the founder's heir. And beside him, in a purple turban, a thin stammering wizard who had flinched at the word Lord the way a creature flinches at a light. And behind that wizard's flinch, in the place behind Harry's own eye, the splinter woke and pressed against its held door and hissed in the underlanguage, a single recognition that ran cold down Harry's spine, because the splinter knew the thing in the turban, knew it the way a fragment knows the hole it was broken from. So that is where you are, Harry thought, looking at Quirinus Quirrell across the silent hall, not letting his face hold any of it. Wearing a teacher, sitting at the high table of my house, eating at my table while you wait for a way back into a body. I know you now, I have your address. And then, because a hall cannot hold a silence forever and a headmaster's first duty is to fill the silences other forces make, Albus Dumbledore rose. He rose slowly, an old wizard in midnight blue, and he spread his hands, and he smiled at the hall and at the unsorted child on the stool, and the smile was warm and grandfatherly and entirely sincere, and underneath it Harry could see, because he had learned to see it, the furious speed of a 100-year-old mind rebuilding its whole world in the space of standing up. Well, Dumbledore said, and his voice filled the hall the way water fills a cup, easy and complete. It seems the hat has given us a sorting none of us will forget, and the oldest object in this castle has reminded the rest of us of a truth we had perhaps grown comfortable forgetting, that this school had founders, that it has heirs, and that one of them has, after 1,000 years, come home to us. He turned the full warmth of him on Harry, and it was a weapon, the most practiced weapon in Britain, and Harry sat under it unmoved. Harry, you are welcome here. You are always going to be welcome here. Whatever else is true between us, and a great deal is, you have come to the one place in the world that was, in the most literal sense, built by your family, and you will find it knows you and loves you, in the way old stone loves the blood that raised it. Sit at any table you like, they are, after all, yours. A ripple of nervous laughter, permission granted by the headmaster's lightness. Let the feast begin. It was beautifully done, and Harry recognized exactly how beautifully, because in 12 sentences Dumbledore had taken the hat's earthquake and folded it back into the warm story of Hogwarts welcoming a lost child home, and turned ownership into belonging and a lord into a student, and reasserted, gently with no force at all, that this was still a school and he was still its headmaster, and the 11-year-old was still, fundamentally, a boy come home to be cared for. He had lost the castle in July, and he was, in front of the whole school, trying to win it back one warm sentence at a time, and the terrible thing was that it would work on everyone in the hall except the one person it was aimed at. Harry rose from the stool. He did not go to a table. He looked up the length of the hall at the headmaster, and he spoke, and he pitched his voice to Carrie, the way Scarnack had taught him, low and clear and without heat. "Thank you, headmaster," Harry said. "You're right that the castle knows me. You're right that it loves me in the way old stone loves blood, and you're right that the tables are mine." He let the hall hear it land. "I'll sit with Gryffindor tonight because my friend Neville is there and I owe his grandmother a courtesy. But I'd like to see you afterward in your office before I sleep in the house my family built. There are things a landlord says to the wizard who's been keeping his house, and they're better said in private than in front of the children. Shall we say an hour after the feast?" The hall heard a first-year summon the chief warlock of the Wisengamot to a meeting in the chief warlock's own office, and the hall did not know what it was hearing, but it felt the temperature of it, and at the high table the greasy master's knuckles had gone white around his goblet, and Albus Dumbledore, master of every silence for 100 years, inclined his head to the child who had just scheduled him. "An hour after the feast," Dumbledore agreed. "My office. I find I am looking forward to it, which at my age is rarer than you would think." The feast resumed around the fact of him the way a river resumes around a stone, the noise climbing back up the hall by degrees, the food appearing in its golden heaps, the children remembering they were hungry, though every few minutes a head would turn from some far table to confirm that the unsorted lord was still real and still there. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table because he had said he would, beside Neville, who guarded the seat for him with a fierce shy loyalty that Harry suspected Neville had never before had occasion to spend, and had been saving without knowing it for someone worth the spending. The half-giant at the high table, whose name Harry had learned was Hagrid, and whose face had been the only one at the staff table to crease into uncomplicated joy at the hat's proclamation, kept beaming down the hall at him and dabbing at his eyes with a tablecloth-sized handkerchief, and Harry marked that too, because a wizard who wept openly with happiness at a stranger's homecoming was a wizard with nothing hidden, and wizards with nothing hidden were rare enough to be precious. They're all scared of you, Neville said quietly, around a mouthful of potatoes, with the bluntness of a boy who had decided that if he was going to befriend the most powerful child in Britain, he might as well do it honestly. The whole table, they don't know whether to talk to you or bow. They'll settle, Harry said. Fear is just surprise that hasn't finished yet. Give them a week of watching me struggle with a quill like everyone else and they'll forget to be afraid. That's the plan, actually. Be boring on purpose until they stop seeing the story and start seeing the person. It worked on my aunt eventually. It'll work on a hall of children. He looked down the table at the wary faces and across the hall to where Daphne sat among the green-trimmed Slytherins like a single cold star in a hostile sky, entirely composed, entirely alone, and entirely fine with it. Eat, Neville. Tomorrow they'll all want to be your friend because you're mine, and you'll have to learn to tell the real ones from the rest, and that's a harder lesson than anything they'll teach you in class. I'll help, I've had practice. The office had not changed since the night the wards turned, except that the wizard in it had stopped pretending. Harry came up the moving stair an hour after the feast, and the gargoyle had stepped aside before he reached it, because the gargoyle answered to the castle and the castle answered to him, and that small thing, a stone guardian opening for a child without a password, would have told Dumbledore everything if Dumbledore had not already known it all. The round office was full of the small silver instruments, and Fawkes burned low and red on his perch, and behind the great desk the headmaster sat in the lamplight, and he had set out 2 cups of tea, and the gesture was the whole of the old strategy in miniature, the warmth, the grandfather, the cup that says, "Sit, child, let me take care of you." Harry did not sit. He stood in the center of the office, among the instruments that had spied on him for 11 years, and he looked at the old wizard across the desk, and the two of them regarded each other for the first time with nothing between them, no chamber, no scrying glass, no proxy, no letter. Just the lord of the castle and the wizard who had run it in the highest room of the house, with the question of who decided lying open on the desk beside the tea. "You're not going to drink the tea," Dumbledore observed. "No, I did not think you would. I made it anyway because old habits are a kind of prayer, and I have prayed over a great many cups of tea in this office, for a great many children, including for 11 years for you." He folded his hands. The twinkle was there and the steel was under it, and tonight, for the first time, he let Harry see both at once, which was its own kind of respect. "So, you have come to tell me the rules of the year. I have spent the summer wondering what they would be." "Tell me, Lord Potter, I am, for the first time in a long and crowded life, genuinely uncertain what a child is about to say to me, and I find the sensation is not entirely unpleasant. It has been some decades since anyone surprised me. Surprise me again." "It's simple," Harry said. "I'm not here to take Hogwarts from you. I thought about it. I hold the deed and the wards and the veto, and I could remove you as headmaster with a single exercise of a power 50 seats can't break, and part of me wanted to, because you put me in a cupboard and called it love and I'm 11, and that part of me is allowed to want things." He let that truth sit, the one named feeling he would permit himself all night, and then he set it down. "But removing you would be deciding for the castle the way you decided for me, and I won't become the thing I'm fighting. So here are the rules. You keep running the school. You teach the classes, you set the timetables, you do the work because you're good at it and the children need it, and I'm 11 and have no interest in marking essays. But you stop deciding things about my house without telling me. The stone in the 3rd-floor corridor, the thing wearing your defense teacher, the traps you've laid in my home for a war you didn't warn me you were fighting on my ground, all of it. From tonight, you brief the owner. You don't have to obey me. You have to inform me, and when the two of us disagree about the safety of the children sleeping in my family's house, you will discover that the wards, the doors, the stairs, and the castle itself take my side, because they know whose blood built them and it wasn't yours." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, the instrument's word. Fawkes turned his head. "You know about the stone," he said at last, "and about Quirinus. You have been here 3 hours. I've owned this place for 3 years, Harry said. "I've just never visited before. There's a difference between a landlord who lives elsewhere and one who doesn't, and you spent the summer preparing for the wrong one. You prepared for a child who'd come home grateful. You got a lord who came home informed." He moved to the desk finally, and he did not sit, but he put one hand flat on the wood, and the lamps in the office brightened, every one of them all at once, responding to the touch of the wizard the castle had been waiting 1,000 years to serve, and they brightened without Harry willing it, the building showing its allegiance without being asked, the way the boat had pulled ahead and the doors had opened. "I'm not your enemy, headmaster. I want the same thing you want, which is for the children in this castle to be safe and for the dark thing that killed my parents to fail. But I'm done being a thing you protect by keeping it in the dark. You're going to fight your war with the owner of the battlefield standing beside you awake, and you're going to find that's better than fighting it over my sleeping head, because I hold cards you've never held and I'm going to play them whether you brief me or not. Brief me and we win cleaner. Those are the rules. Drink your tea, you made it, you might as well." And Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in Britain, looked at the 11-year-old standing in the brightened office with one hand flat on a desk that was not the wizard's to own, and he picked up his cup of tea, and he drank it slowly, and over the rim of it his eyes had gone bright with something that was not quite grief and not quite pride and not quite fear and contained, Harry thought, a measure of all three. "Those are the rules," Dumbledore agreed when he had set the cup down. "I accept them, Lord Potter, with one amendment, which I offer not as a condition, but as the honesty you have demanded of me. I will inform you of everything. But I will also, when I believe you are wrong, tell you that you are wrong plainly to your face, as I would any wizard I respected, because the day I stop doing that is the day I have decided you are a child after all, and you have just spent 3 hours proving you are not, and I would be a poor steward of your castle if I lied to its lord to spare his feelings." He rose, an old wizard unfolding from his chair. "Welcome home, Harry. I mean it more than you will believe, and I have earned your disbelief, and I will spend whatever years are left to me trying to earn something better. Go and sleep in your family's house. The stairs will take you wherever you wish to go. They have, I notice, stopped taking me." The school took a week to learn how to hold him, and Harry spent the week being, as promised, boring on purpose, which was the hardest performance of his life. He slept in Gryffindor Tower, in the end, in a bed beside Neville's, because the castle had offered him grander things, had tried on the first night to grow him a private suite off a corridor that had not existed that morning, four-postered and fire-warmed and paneled in the colors of all 4 houses. And Harry had stood in the doorway of the room his own house had built him out of love and homesickness, and told it gently in the underlanguage that he was grateful and that he would sleep in the dormitory with the other first years, because a lord who slept apart from his people on the first night would never afterward be one of them. The room had folded itself quietly back into the wall. The castle, he was learning, could be argued with, and took being argued with the way an old dog takes it, with a sort of pleased surprise that anyone was bothering to talk to it at all. The classes were the easy part. He had 3 years of goblin tutoring under the schoolwork, and he could have humiliated every teacher in the building, and he did not, because Thornwick had taught him that the wizard who shows the whole of his hand has thrown away the only advantage worth keeping. So he was good, quietly, consistently good, and never the best, and let Hermione Granger be the best, which she wanted with a hunger that touched him, and which cost him nothing, and bought her loyalty cheaper than any spell could have. Potions was the test, and the master of it had been waiting for him. Severus Snape stalked into the dungeon on the first morning like a thing that lived in the dark and rescented the candles, and he took the register, and he stopped at Harry's name the way Dumbledore had stopped at it on the parchment, and the whole class felt the room change temperature. "Potter," Snape said very softly, "our new celebrity, tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" It was a question pitched to humiliate. 3 years of curriculum aimed at a first year on his first day, the oldest trick a cruel teacher owned. "You get the draught of living death, sir," Harry said. "Asphodel and wormwood, a sleeping potion so strong it imitates death. You're testing whether I'm arrogant by asking a thing you assume I can't answer, so that when I can't, you can decide in front of the class what kind of lord I am. I can answer it. But the question under your question is the real one, so I'll answer that too." He met the black eyes, and he did not let the founder's depth show, but he used it, the Slytherin sight reading the dungeon master down to the grief at the bottom of him. "You knew my mother. You flinched at the hat, not at the word lord, the way I thought, but at the word Gryffindor, because that was her house and not yours, and you've spent 11 years teaching in a castle full of her absence. I'm not here to make that worse. I'm here to learn potions from the best brewer in Britain, which the records say is you, and I'd rather learn from a man who hated my father and loved my mother than from a comfortable wizard who never felt strongly about anything. 5 points to whichever of us is less of a coward about it, sir." The dungeon had gone silent. Snape stared at the 11-year-old who had reached past his armor and named the thing under it in front of a room of children, and for a moment something terrible moved behind the black eyes, grief and fury and a kind of appalled recognition, and Harry held still and let him have the moment, because Tresh had taught him that you do not press a man who has just been seen. You let him decide, in his own time, whether being seen was an attack or a mercy. "Detention, Potter," Snape said at last, but his voice had lost its edge, and the detention, when Harry served it, turned out to be 3 hours of the finest practical instruction in brewing he would receive in 7 years, given grudgingly in near silence, by a man working out in real time whether the son of the woman he had failed was a thing to be punished, or against every instinct he owned taught. Harry took the teaching and asked no questions, and earned, by the end of the night, a single nod, which from Severus Snape was worth more than Hagrid's tears, because it had cost so much more to give. The friendships sorted themselves out across that first week, with the quiet inevitability of water finding its level. Hermione brought her 3 times read certainty to the library table every evening, and Harry let her run the studying, because a wizard who insists on leading everything ends by carrying everything. And Neville, who had spent 11 years being told he was nearly a squib, discovered under Harry's flat refusal to believe it that he had a steady, stubborn gift for the growing magic of herbology that none of his teachers had thought to go looking for. Daphne came to the table too, eventually, cold and uninvited and entirely welcome. a Slytherin sitting openly among Gryffindors because the heir of the four houses had made the oldest boarders in the castle look, for the first time in 1,000 years, like lines that someone had merely drawn and someone else might therefore redraw. By the week's end the school had stopped staring, more or less, and Harry walked its corridors as both its student and its lord and felt the building greet him at every turn, the stairs steadying under his feet, the doors easing as he reached them, the portraits falling silent with respect as he passed and then arguing about him furiously the moment they thought he was gone. And every day, twice a day, he passed the purple-turbaned wizard who taught defense, and every day the splinter behind his eye woke and pressed and hissed its cold recognition. And every day Harry passed Quirinus Quirrell with a polite first-year's nod and let the thing wearing him believe it had not been noticed, because the founders had taught him patience, and the goblins had taught him timing, and the splinter had taught him, against his will. Exactly what a scattered Dark Lord felt like when it was close and hungry and waiting. He's going for the stone, Harry thought, watching the turban recede down a corridor that belonged to Harry and not to the thing inside it. Not yet. He's testing the traps the way I'd test them. He'll move when he thinks the castle is asleep. He doesn't know the castle stopped sleeping the night I arrived. He thinks he's hunting in an empty house. He was not hunting in an empty house. He was hunting in Harry's house with Harry awake in it, and the only question left was when the thing that had killed Harry's parents would finally reach for the prize, and discover at the last possible moment that the owner had been standing in the dark the whole time, waiting for exactly this, with 3 years of preparation and 4 founders and a castle that loved him coiled and ready behind a polite first-year's nod. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The gathering storm. The briefings happened at midnight, which suited both of them, because both of them did their truest thinking after the castle had gone to sleep, and there was no one left to perform for. Dumbledore had kept his word, which Harry had not entirely expected, and which he had revised his model of the old wizard to account for. Every few nights a slip of parchment would find its way to Harry, carried by no owl, simply appearing folded on his pillow in the Gryffindor dormitory, and it would name a thing the headmaster had learned and an hour and the password to the office, and Harry would go up through the sleeping castle and they would sit across the great desk, the lord and the steward, and they would lay out what each of them knew and watch the shape it made. Quirinus moved against the third-floor corridor on Tuesday, Dumbledore said on the 9th such night. He got past the dog. Hagrid, I am sorry to report, told a stranger in a pub how to soothe the creature, which is the kind of thing Hagrid does, and which I have stopped trying to cure him of, because the day Hagrid stops trusting strangers is the day we have lost the best of him. Quirinus got past the dog and through Pomona's devil's snare, and as far as Phileas's chamber of keys before he turned back. He is testing the gauntlet layer by layer, the way a careful thief tests a lock. He's not a careful thief, Harry said. He's a careful thief carrying an impatient master, and the two of them disagree about pace. That's our advantage if we use it. The thing inside Quirrell wants the stone now, tonight, every night. Quirrell wants to survive, which means going slowly. So the moment they stop disagreeing, the moment Quirrell stops being allowed to be careful, is the moment they move for real, and will know it's coming because Quirrell will start looking worse. The thing's burning him up to wear him. When he looks like he's dying, that's the night. Dumbledore regarded him across the desk, and there was a quality in the regard that had taken 9 midnights to develop, the wary respect of a wizard who had spent a century being the cleverest person in every room and was adjusting slowly to a room in which he was merely one of two. You reason about him, Dumbledore said, as though you can feel him. Most of my conclusions about Voldemort are built from 40 years of study. Yours arrive faster than study allows, and they are correct, which study does not guarantee. I have wondered these 9 nights how an 11-year-old reads the rhythm of a Dark Lord's impatience as though reading his own pulse. A pause, gentle, surgical. Will you tell me about your scar, Harry? I have a theory I would very much like to be wrong about, and you are the only person alive who can confirm it, and I have decided, as part of our new arrangement, to ask you a thing directly instead of arranging to find it out behind your back. Harry looked at the old wizard and weighed, as he weighed everything, how much truth the situation could bear, and decided it could bear all of it, because the alliance was real or it was nothing. There's a piece of him in it, Harry said. Lodged the night he tried to kill me when his curse rebounded and broke him. The bank found it 3 years ago. It's a window, headmaster. I can listen through it. That's how I read his impatience like my own pulse, because while the piece is in me, his impatience is in the smallest and most unwelcome way my own. I've used it all year. It told me where Quirrell was the first night. It tells me when he's hungry. He let the next part land flat because it was the part that mattered. And it's killing me by inches, and it's a piece of his soul, which means it's one of the anchors keeping him from dying properly, and the day I let it be cleansed out of me, I lose the window and he loses an anchor, and I've been putting that day off because the window is the best intelligence asset I've ever held, and I'm not yet sure the trade is worth it. So now you know my theory too. Tell me yours, and let's find out if they're the same. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice had aged a decade in the saying. They are the same, he said. I had hoped they were not. I have known since the night I felt the wards turn that the thing in your scar was what I feared it was, and I had built, across 11 years, a long and terrible plan for the day it would have to be dealt with. A plan that began with the assumption that you would not know, could not know, must be kept from knowing, because the knowing would be unbearable to a child. He folded his hands and looked at them, the long old hands that had arranged so many lives. And here you sit, knowing all of it, having known it for years, having weaponized the very thing I meant to protect you from the truth of. I built my whole strategy around your ignorance, Harry, and you have never once been ignorant, and I find that the discovery does not wound my pride, which surprises me so much as it grieves me, because it means you carried this alone at 8, at 9, at 10, while I congratulated myself on sparing you. There is no arrangement of true things, is there, that does not end with me having failed you in some new and particular way. No, Harry agreed, not unkindly, because the alliance was real. But you're failing me better now than you used to. That's the most anyone improves. Drink your tea. We've got a dark lord to time. Quirrell started looking worse 3 weeks later, on the night of a Cursebreakers conference that had drawn half the senior staff to London, which was not a coincidence, because the thing-wearing Quirrell could read a calendar too. Harry felt it before he saw it. He was in the library with Hermione and Neville, ostensibly studying, actually watching the Splinter, and the Splinter went from its usual sullen simmer to a sudden bright hunger, a feeling like a held breath about to be spent, and Harry stood up in the middle of a sentence and said, "It's tonight," and Hermione, who had spent a term learning not to ask Harry to explain the things he knew, simply gathered her books and said, "What do we do?" which was, Harry thought, the most valuable sentence a friend had ever offered him. "You two find Professor McGonagall and tell her the third-floor corridor is being robbed," Harry said. "She'll believe you because Dumbledore briefed her this morning on my instruction, which she resented, and resentment makes wizards remember things. Then you stay with her. This part isn't yours." "And you," Neville said. "I'm going to go and meet the thing that killed my parents in a corridor that belongs to me," Harry said. "While it thinks the house is empty, I've been waiting all year. Go." The third-floor corridor was not empty and not asleep, and as Harry came up through the castle came awake around him, the torches leaning toward him, the stairs setting themselves to carry him, the doors along the corridor unlocking themselves at his approach and locking again behind him, the building arranging itself into a single throat that led its lord to the intruder in its heart. The great three-headed dog lay drugged across the trapdoor it guarded, and Harry stepped past it, and the dog, even drugged, even enchanted to serve whoever held the music, thumped its tail at him in its sleep, because the dog belonged to Hagrid and Hagrid belonged to the castle and the castle belonged to Harry. He went down through the gauntlet the staff had built, and the gauntlet let him pass because every trap in it had been keyed at the deepest level to the wards, and the wards knew him. The devil's snare loosened from his ankles and drew back. The flying keys hung motionless in the air as he crossed beneath them. The great chessboard, where a stranger would have had to play and win, simply cleared its pieces to the edges of the board and let its owner walk across the empty squares, the White King removing his own crown and bowing as Harry passed. Layer by layer, the school's defenses recognized the wizard they had been built, 1,000 years before any of these particular spells, to ultimately serve, and they opened for him the way the great doors had opened on the first night, and Harry walked down into the deepest chamber of the gauntlet and found Quirinus Quirrell standing before a tall mirror, and the turban was off, and where the back of the skull should have been there was a face. It was a terrible face, flat and white and serpentine, with red eyes and slits for a nose, and it had been 11 years ago the most feared face in Britain, and it was now a parasite riding a dying teacher, and it turned on the back of Quirrell's head as Harry entered, and the red eyes found him, and the thing that had killed his parents looked at the child who owned its prize. "Harry Potter," said the face on the back of the skull in a high cold voice that was not Quirrell's, and the splinter behind Harry's eye leapt and strained toward it, fragment yearning toward whole. "How convenient, the little lord come down to his own dungeon all alone. Quirrell told me you nodded at us in the corridors. A polite child. Stupid, I thought, to nod at your own death every morning. But you are not stupid, are you? You knew, you have known all year. You let us hunt in your house and said nothing." "I wanted to see how you do it," Harry said. He stood very still in the mouth of the chamber, and he did not reach for a wand, because the founders had taught him that the wizard who reaches for a wand has admitted he needs one. "You're after the stone. The mirror's got it. Dumbledore's no fool. He hid it where only someone who wants it but doesn't want to use it can reach it, which isn't you because you want it desperately, so the mirror will show you holding it and never give it to you. You've been standing here failing for an hour. I can feel you failing. It's the most relaxed I've been all year." "Clever," hissed Voldemort. "Clever like your mother. She was clever at the end, clever and useless, begging. You will beg too, I think, when I have the stone and a body in your castle besides." "See, that's the part you've got wrong," Harry said, and now he moved, walking into the chamber, into the red glare of the thing's attention, with the unhurried confidence of a wizard on his own ground. You think you're here for the stone, you're not. The stone's just a body and a long life, and a body and a long life are only worth having if you've got somewhere to be immortal. You want this castle, Tom, you've always wanted it. You wanted to be its heir when you were a clever poor orphan in its halls, and it wouldn't have you, and it broke something in you that was already cracked, and everything you've done since has been a long tantrum aimed at the house that wouldn't call you its lord. He watched the red eyes flicker, watched the name Tom land like a slap, because no one had called the thing by its true name in 40 years, and the splinter had given Harry the name for free. I own it now, the thing you wanted most, the only thing you ever really wanted under the immortality and the blood and the long stupid war. And I got it at 8 by being born without trying, which is the part you'll never forgive. So no, I won't beg. You're a homesick orphan throwing a 40-year fit at a house that loves me and hates you, and I came down here to tell you to your face that you can have the stone, the mirror, the dog, the dungeon, anything in this room. You will never have the castle, it's mine. It was always going to be someone's, and it was never going to be yours, and that Tom is the true account, and I am the only person alive who will say it to your face. The thing on the back of Quirrell's head screamed, and Quirrell turned, and the duel that the storybooks would later invent did not happen, because Harry had not come to duel. He had come to let the castle do what castles do for the lords they love. When Quirrell lunged, hands out, the old protection in Harry's skin, his mother's love rendered into law, flared at the contact and burned Quirrell, exactly as it had burned a Dark Lord 11 years before. That was the small thing, the inheritance from his mother, and Harry let it work and did not rely on it because he had a larger inheritance now. As Quirrell reeled back with his hands blistering, Harry laid his own bare hand flat against the chamber wall, and he reached down through the stone into the wardstone in the cellar of the world, and he asked the castle in the underlanguage for help, and the castle, which had waited 1,000 years to be asked, answered its lord all at once. The chamber moved. The walls Harry owned leaned inward, the floor Harry owned tilted the intruder toward him and away from the mirror. The very stone of the room, which had been built by the founders whose magic ran in Harry's blood, ceased to be neutral architecture and became the limb of a living thing defending its heart. Ropes of stone grew from the walls and bound the burning teacher. The air in the chamber, the castle's own breath, thickened against Quirrell and thinned around Harry, so that the intruder labored for every movement, and Harry moved as easily as a fish in water that had decided to be on his side. Voldemort's wand spat curses, and the curses struck the walls, and the walls drank them, because a wizard cannot curse a house that knows him for an enemy any more than he can drown a fish by threatening the sea. You see it now, Harry said, walking through the chaos untouched, the lord in his own defended heart. This is what ownership means, not a deed in a vault. This, the walls take my side. You spent 40 years trying to make this castle yield to fear, and it was never going to, because it doesn't answer to fear, it answers to blood, and the blood it answers to is standing in front of you telling you it's over. The thing inside Quirrell understood at last that it had walked into the one place in the world where it could not win, and it did the only thing it had ever truly been good at, which was abandon a dying servant to save itself. The white serpentine face tore loose from the back of Quirrell's skull in a shriek of black smoke, and the body it had ridden crumpled to the stone floor, finished, and the smoke that was all that remained of Lord Voldemort gathered itself and fled up through the gauntlet out through the castle, and the castle let it go because the castle was Harry's, and Harry had decided in that instant on a thing more important than killing a wraith. He let it flee. And as it tore past him, fragment screaming toward whole, Harry did the thing he had been putting off all year, the thing he had judged not yet worth the cost, and judged now, with the wraith fleeing and the castle awake and the founders coiled in him, to be worth exactly everything. He cleansed the splinter. It was not a spell. There was no spell for it. It was a decision made in the deep place under the language to stop being a house with a tenant, and the castle and the founders made the decision real. Harry reached for the warm brown weight of Helga, the loyalty that was loyalty to the ground itself, and he set it under the door behind his eye, a floor where there had been a threshold, and then he reached for the red gold fire of Godric and the cold green sight of Salazar and the blue clarity of Rowena, and he turned all 4 of them at once on the thing the Dark Lord had left in him, and the founder's magic, which had been built 1,000 years ago for exactly this. For cleaning what should not be in a wizard, rose up through the wardstone and the walls and Harry's own blood and met the splinter. The fragment knew it was dying and fought the way only a piece of a soul that has refused death 4 times can fight. It threw at Harry every weapon it had, every borrowed memory, every stolen rhythm of the Dark Lord's hunger, the high cold voice promising power, promising knowledge, promising that Harry needed it, that the window it gave was worth keeping, that a wizard as ambitious as Harry would be a fool to burn his own best spy. And for a moment, one cold, vertiginous moment, the Slytherin part of Harry agreed, because the window was a magnificent asset and ambition is the easiest of the 4 gifts to weaponize against its bearer, and Harry felt himself begin to reach to keep the splinter, to hold the dark thing in him because it was useful, because power kept his power, because Hufflepuff caught him. The warm brown weight, the loyalty under everything, reminded him in the wordless place what he was loyal to, which was not power and not ambition and not the magnificent asset, but the living children sleeping in the towers above him and his mother who had spent herself to the last drop, and the simple unglamorous fact that a wizard who keeps a piece of his enemy's soul in his head, because it is useful, has already begun in the smallest and most unwelcome way to become his enemy. And Harry let the window go. The Founder's magic closed over the splinter like soil over a seed that would never now grow, and the fragment of Lord Voldemort that had ridden behind Harry's eye for 11 years screamed one last time, a thin black thread of refusal in a great rising white, and then it was gone, burned clean, scoured out, and the scar over Harry's eye, which had ached every day of his remembered life, went cool and quiet for the first time and stayed quiet. And Harry stood in the wrecked chamber over the body of a dead teacher and a fleeing wraith with one anchor fewer, and he was, for the first time, entirely himself, undivided, a house with no tenant, a single clean blood, and the relief of it was so total that he had to put a hand on the wall the castle had bent to defend him, and the castle held him up, the way Helga had said it would, the way the ground holds the loyal. One down, Harry said aloud to the dead chamber, to the Founder's quiet in him, to the wraith already a county away. How many more pieces did you make, Tom? Because I'm going to find everyone, and I'm going to take you apart the way you took yourself apart, and unlike you, I'll be doing it for the right reasons. Dumbledore found him there an hour later, the staff having raced back from their conference too late for anything but the aftermath, and the old wizard took in the scene, the burned body, the wrecked stone now smoothing itself back to whole at its lord's unconscious wish, the unhurt child sitting against the wall with a scar gone quiet, and Albus Dumbledore understood most of it at a glance. Because he had spent 40 years studying the Dark Lord and 10 weeks studying Harry, and the two studies had finally converged. You let him flee, Dumbledore said. It was not an accusation. It was a wizard confirming a thing he admired and feared in equal measure. You had him bound in a castle that obeys you, and you let him flee, and you used the moment to cleanse the scar instead. You chose the long victory over the short one. I have spent my life trying to teach that choice to wizards twice your age, and failing. Killing the wraith tonight wins me a year, maybe two, while he finds another body, Harry said. Cleansing the scar costs me my best intelligence and wins me forever because it's one of the anchors gone and there's no putting a soul piece back once it's burned, and now there are fewer things tying him to life, which means when we finally do kill him, he'll stay killed. He looked up at the old wizard. You knew about the anchors, the pieces of his soul, you've known for years. That was your long, terrible plan, wasn't it? Find them, destroy them. Then the scar last because you thought the scar was one of them and you thought it couldn't be removed without removing me. Horcruxes, Dumbledore said quietly. That is the name of the abomination. A wizard splits his soul and hides the pieces, and while one piece survives, he cannot truly die. Yes. I have spent 11 years learning their nature and beginning, slowly, to hunt them. And yes, I believe the scar was the last and worst of them, anchored in a living child, removable only by the child's death, and I built my entire long plan around the terrible arithmetic of that belief, and I told no one, least of all you. He looked at the quiet scar, the clean blood, the undivided child. And you have just proven in a single night that the arithmetic was wrong. That it could be cleansed without killing you. That the Founders built into this castle the very tool I spent a decade believing did not exist. You have unmade the worst sum of my life, Harry, and I find I am weeping, which I had thought myself too old to do, and I am not certain whether it is grief for the years I spent certain you would have to die, or relief that you will not, and I suspect it is both, which is the honest answer and the only one I have left. Harry let the old wizard have his tears because the alliance was real, and because a wizard who wept over arithmetic he had been wrong about was a wizard worth allying with, and then he stood, and the chamber finished healing itself around them. There's a harder thing coming, Harry said. Tonight was the easy version because tonight he came as a thief after a stone in a borrowed body, and a thief can be turned away by a house that knows him. But he's going to work out what I worked out in the vault. He's going to realize the stone was never the prize, the castle is, and he's going to come back not as a thief but as a claimant, because there's a thing about him you haven't told me, Headmaster, a thing the goblins found, and I think you've known it longer than they have, and I think it's the reason you've always been afraid of exactly this. Tom Riddle isn't only a Dark Lord, he's Slytherin's heir, the Gaunt Line. He has a real claim to one of my 4 houses, and when he comes back he's going to come to contest the ownership, and the next fight won't be decided by a castle choosing its lord. It'll be decided by founder law in front of everyone on the question of whether holding one house can be made to outweigh holding all 4. And I need to know everything you know about that claim before he forces it, because the next battlefield isn't this dungeon, it's the deed itself. And Albus Dumbledore, who had hidden that exact fact for 40 years, looked at the 11-year-old who had deduced it from a scar in a vault and a wraith's homesick fury, and understood that the age of keeping things from Harry Potter was over, and had been over perhaps since before it began. Sit down, Harry, the headmaster said, and his voice was the voice of a wizard finally laying the whole board on the table. I will tell you about the Gaunts and the ring and the diary and the long sad story of the orphan who wanted to be Slytherin's heir and became something that no longer deserved the name. And then we will decide together how an heir who holds all 4 houses defends a deed against an heir who holds one and will burn the world to take it, because you are right, the storm is coming, and it will not break on this dungeon. It will break on the question of who owns Hogwarts, and that question will be answered at last in front of everyone by the oldest law there is. He told it, and Harry sat against the healing wall and took it in as he took everything, fact laid against fact until the shape stood clear. He split his soul into 7, Dumbledore said, because 7 is the most powerfully magical number, and because a wizard who has decided to mutilate himself does not do it by halves. 6 pieces hidden away and a 7th kept in his own body, so that while any single fragment survived, death could not hold him. That was the design. He did not plan for an 8th. The night his curse rebounded in your nursery, his soul was already so torn that a piece sheared loose and lodged in the nearest living thing, which was you, unintended, unwanted, an accident of a soul too ragged to stay whole. That was the fragment you burned out of yourself tonight. It was never meant to exist. You have spent the night correcting his arithmetic for him, and he does not yet know the correction has been made. 6 deliberate pieces, Harry said. Where? That is the labor of the last decade, and I am further along than I have told anyone. Dumbledore's hands had gone still on his knees. A diary from his school years, the first he made at 16, which is its own horror. A ring, the ring of the House of Gaunt, his mother's people, the last debased remnant of the line of Salazar Slytherin, and through them of the Peverils before. A locket which was Slytherin's own, a cup which was Helga Hufflepuff's, and a diadem which was Rowena Ravenclaw's, lost for centuries, which I have reason to believe he recovered, and hid with a special spite in the one place he ever felt safe. The old wizard looked up. He hid a piece of his soul in the treasures of 3 of your 4 houses, Harry. Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem. He could not take Gryffindor's sword because Gryffindor's blade does not suffer corruption and would have burned his soul to touch it, and that small failure, I think, enraged him more than all his successes. He defiled what he could reach of your inheritance and called it immortality. Harry was very still, and the stillness was the one named feeling he allowed himself, a cold, clean anger laid carefully down where it could be used and not spilled. The diadem, he said. You said he hid it where he felt safe. He felt safe here. He hid a piece of his soul in my castle. It was not a question. The Slytherin sight had already shown him the shape of it. It's been sitting in my house the whole time, in a room that hides things. I felt a wrongness on the 7th floor all term and put it down the list because I had a wraith to time. That's it, isn't it? There's a piece of him in my own walls. The room of hidden things, Dumbledore said softly. Yes, and you can reach it where I never could because the castle conceals nothing from its lord. You could walk up tonight and take it. I have hunted these objects across the country for 10 years, and you have just realized that one of them has been sleeping under your roof, findable by you for the asking because you own the roof. He shook his head slowly. Do you understand now why I feared exactly this, not your ownership, your reach? The same blood that bows the castle to you opens every hiding place a clever orphan ever thought was secret, because he hid his soul in the bones of the 4 houses, and the 4 houses answer to you. And the diary, Harry said. You named 6 and you've placed 5. The diary's loose. You don't know where it is. I do not. He made it first and trusted it least carefully before he understood what he was making, and I believe he gave it into the keeping of a follower as a thing to be deployed, a weapon rather than an anchor, because a diary that can pour its piece of soul into a living person, and wear them is not only insurance against death. It is a soldier that can be posted. Dumbledore's gaze sharpened. If it is in the world in the hands of one of his people, then it is a danger that does not wait for his return. It can act on its own. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said, and watched the name land and the old wizard not contradict it. He came to Gringotts the week after the Wisengamot, all silk and calculation, trying to work out whether to befriend me or bury me, a man holding a piece of his master's soul, deciding which way to jump. If he ever decides the wind has changed, if he ever wants to prove his loyalty to a returning master or simply to sow chaos in a school he resents, he has a weapon that walks into a child and wears her like a coat. He stood, finally, the chamber whole around him now, the dead teacher covered, the mirror dark. So that's the board. 5 anchors I can hunt, 3 of them my own house's treasures, 1 of them in my own walls. A 6th loose in the hands of a frightened, ambitious wizard who might deploy it at any time. And a dark lord, scattered and bodiless, who is also the heir of Slytherin, and who's going to come back, and who's going to come not for a stone but for a deed, because the only thing he ever truly wanted is the castle that just threw him out, and he has a claim to one of its 4 houses to dress the wanting up as law. They climbed out of the gauntlet into a castle that did not yet know what had happened in its cellar, and the morning, when it came, arranged the public version of the night with the quiet competence of an institution protecting itself. Professor Quirrell had died of a sudden illness, the kind that takes the frail in the cold months. The third-floor corridor had always been out of bounds. There was nothing for the children to know and a great deal for them to invent, and they invented it happily over breakfast while the truth sat one seat down the table eating toast. Hermione found him first because Hermione found everything first, and she looked at his scar, which she had never seen quiet, and she said, "It stopped, hasn't it? The thing you wouldn't tell me about, whatever it was doing, it stopped." And Harry said, "It stopped," and she did not ask for more, which was the gift she had learned to give him over a term, the gift of being trusted to wait. Neville sat down on his other side with the fierce, uncomplicated loyalty he had been saving his whole life, and asked no questions at all, and passed Harry the marmalade, which was, in its way, the most eloquent thing anyone said to him that morning. And across the hall Daphne Greengrass caught his eye over the green-trimmed heads of Slytherin, and read in his face whatever a greengrass reads, and inclined her head a precise degree, the cold acknowledgment of one survivor to another that the board had shifted in the night. The wider world shifted with it slowly, the way weather shifts before the front arrives. The Daily Prophet noticed nothing, because the prophet noticed nothing it was not handed. But the dark families noticed, in the quiet way they noticed things, that something had moved in the dark and then fled, and Lucius Malfoy wrote Harry a letter that was 3 degrees warmer than correctness required, which told Harry that Lucius had felt his master stir and was hedging, and the neutral houses noticed that the heir of the 4 houses had survived a thing he would not name, and the light families noticed that Dumbledore had stopped sleeping. And all of it together made a pressure in the wizarding world that had no name yet, the pressure of a thing long buried beginning to push up through the soil. The Ministry did what the Ministry did, which was to decide nothing had happened, because something having happened would have obliged someone to act, and Cornelius Fudge had built a career on the principle that the calmest minister is the one who notices least. A teacher had died of a chill. The school was safe. The heir, the prophet called him now, having quietly retired the older nickname when it stopped fitting the cold, composed child the rumors described, remained where he belonged, and the minister saw no cause for alarm, and said so 3 times in lime green prose, and went back to sleep. Harry let the ministry sleep, because a sleeping ministry was a ministry not interfering, and he spent its sleep. On the last Wisengamot session before the holidays he had Scarnack rise and enter into the record, a dry little instrument the chamber barely troubled to debate and would one day wish it had read. A founder's writ of reclamation, asserting the heir's ancient standing to recover, from any holder whatsoever, the lost and stolen treasures of his 4 houses, wherever in Britain they might be found. It passed in under a minute between a tax measure and a question about owl licensing, because it sounded like a matter of museums, and because not one wizard on those benches yet understood that 3 of those treasures were anchors of a Dark Lord's torn soul, and that the heir of the 4 houses had just made it lawful to walk into any vault in the country and carry them out. "You are laying the ground a full year before the battle," Scarnack observed afterward, in the cold corridor outside the chamber, with the dry approval Harry had come to value above warmer wizards' praise. "The lords in that room believe they granted you a curator's permit. You have in truth armed yourself with a lawful key to every hiding place your enemy owns, and you did it while they worried about owls. I find that I am, against the whole tradition and dignity of my profession, beginning to enjoy watching you work, Lord Potter, and I will thank you not to repeat that to the auditors." "He'll go quiet now," Harry told Dumbledore on the last midnight of term, across the great desk that had become the place they decided things. "He lost a body and an anchor in one night. He'll crawl off to somewhere thin and forested and spend a year, 2 years, 3, rebuilding a way back. We have that time, and I'm not going to waste it the way you wasted the last 10, hunting his anchors one at a time across the country while he sleeps." He laid his hand flat on the desk, and the lamps brightened, the castle leaning in to hear its lord. "I'm going to take the diadem out of my own walls this week, because it's mine to reach. I'm going to use the goblins and the 4 seats and every scrap of founder law to track the locket and the cup and the ring, because they're my house's treasures, and the charter gives me standing to reclaim them that no ministry can deny. I'm going to find out which of Malfoy's vaults holds a diary, and I'm going to make holding it more dangerous than surrendering it. And when he finally comes back with a body and a claim and 40 years of fury, he's going to find that the anchors he hid in the bones of my houses are gone, pulled out one by the heir those bones answer to, and that the only thing tying him to life by then will be the last fight, the one he's been marching toward since he was a clever poor orphan who wanted to be Slytherin's heir. And that fight," Dumbledore said, and he did not soften it because the age of softening things for Harry was over, "will come here, to the deed. He will not contest you in a courtroom, Harry, whatever the law says, because law is a wall and he has spent his life going through walls rather than around them. He will come with everything he has to the wardstone itself, because there is a black rite, old and forbidden, by which a rival heir may tear a wardstone from its holder and bind it to himself, and the rite is paid for in one currency only, the blood of the holder spilled on the stone he holds." The old wizard met his eyes. "He needs you dead, Harry, and not merely dead." Dead at the Wardstone with his Slytherin claim in his hand, so that the castle that threw him out is forced, by the oldest law there is, to call its murderer lord. That is the storm, that is what is coming. He wants your house, and the only way he can take it is over your body, on your own foundation stone, and he will spend whatever is left of himself to get there. Harry stood in the brightened office, the castle warm and awake and loyal around him, the four founders settled and reconciled in his clean undivided blood, and he looked north and east into the dark where a scattered Dark Lord was already crawling toward the thin forests to begin the long work of coming back. Good, Harry said. Let him come for the deed. It's the one fight where being the owner isn't just an advantage, it's the whole game. He's going to march an army to my foundation stone to make my house call him lord, and he's going to discover at the very last moment, with everything spent, that a house does not betray the blood that built it, no matter whose claim is dressed up as law, no matter whose blood is spilled on the stone. He's been losing this fight since before he started it. He just doesn't know yet that the war is over the one thing in the world that was never going to choose him. He turned for the door, and the stairs set themselves to carry him down to his friends and his bed, and the diadem he would pull from his own walls before the week was out. Brief me when you find the next anchor. We've got a Dark Lord to take apart, and this time, Headmaster, we're going to do it together, in the light, with the owner awake. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Lord of Hogwarts. 2 years is a long time when you're 13, and Harry spent it as he had told Dumbledore he would, which was taking his enemy apart while his enemy slept. The diadem came out of the castle first, that same week, exactly where the Slytherin sight had told him it would be, in the vast forgotten room of hidden things where 1,000 years of students had stuffed what they could not keep and could not throw away. Harry walked up to the 7th floor and asked the castle to show him the room, and the castle, concealing nothing from its lord, showed him, and the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw lay where a clever orphan had hidden it half a century before, beautiful and defiled, a piece of a torn soul curled inside a founder's crown. Harry did not try to destroy it with the crude tools the storybooks favored. He carried it down to the deep stone and let the castle and the four founders do what they had done to the splinter behind his eye, and the diadem screamed and went quiet, and a second anchor was gone, and the crown, cleansed, hummed in his hands like a struck bell, and he sent it north to Ravenclaw's empty tower where it had always belonged. The others took longer because the others were not in his house. But the founder's writ of reclamation was a lawful key, and Gringotts was a lock-picking institution of the first rank, and one by one the treasures of his houses came home. The locket of Slytherin, recovered from a cave by a curse-breaking team the bank fielded under the writ, cleansed and quiet. The cup of Hufflepuff, lifted from a deep vault by goblins who enjoyed the work more than they would admit, because the vault belonged to a family that had wronged them once, and the writ let them collect the debt in the only currency that ever satisfied them, which was correctness. The ring of the Gaunts, the ring of the line of Slytherin, found by Dumbledore in a ruined shack and brought to the castle, cleansed by the four founders in the deep stone, the worst of the anchors and the most personal, because it carried not only a piece of the Dark Lord's soul but the proof of his claim, the bloodline that made him Slytherin's heir. And the diary. The diary had been the danger that did not wait, exactly as Dumbledore had feared, and it had surfaced in Harry's second year, slipped by an unseen hand into the school bag of a frightened first-year girl, a Weasley, the youngest of that loyal red-haired house, and it had begun to wear her, pouring its piece of soul into her by degrees, walking her through the castle in the dark to open old horrors. Harry had felt it as he felt everything in his house, a wrongness moving through corridors that answered to him, and he had tracked it not as a hero rescuing a maiden but as a landlord finding a fire, and he had taken the diary out of the girl's hands before it had quite finished hollowing her, and he had looked at the shadow of 16-year-old Tom Riddle rising out of its pages, and he had said, "You're a memory of a thing I've already beaten twice," and he had given the diary to the cleansing stone. And watched the shadow of the orphan unmake itself screaming, and carried the emptied, weeping girl back to her brothers, and said nothing of the part where her year had nearly been the price of Lucius Malfoy's hedging. He had said nothing to anyone but Lucius. To Lucius he had said a great deal, in a cold room with one lamp, and Lucius Malfoy had gone very pale and very still, because the heir of the four houses had laid on the table between them a diary, a witness's account and a choice, and the choice was the same one Harry had offered 2 years before, made suddenly literal. Be correct toward the heir, completely and forever, or be destroyed by the evidence of what you handed to a child. Lucius had chosen correctness again, and this time he had meant it down to the root, because a wizard who has watched his own weapon nearly cost him everything has learned a thing about the master he served, and Harry had watched the first true crack appear in the dark faction's loyalty, and known that when the storm came, House Malfoy would, at the decisive moment, find a reason to be elsewhere. So when Lord Voldemort finally clawed his way back into a body in the spring of Harry's 3rd year, by a dark rite in a thin forest that cost the lives of 3 followers and most of what remained of his patience, he rose into a world that had been quietly disarmed beneath him. 5 anchors gone, the diary unmade, the scar cleansed, the treasures of 3 houses reclaimed, and the proof of his own claim pulled from a ruined shack. He had one piece of his soul left in the great snake that never left his side, and after that there was only himself, mortal at last, a wizard who had spent 40 years buying immortality on credit and discovered, on the day he meant to collect, that a 13-year-old had been quietly paying down the debt against him. He came for the castle anyway. He had to. It was the only thing he had ever truly wanted, and now it was the only move he had left. The army reached the gates of Hogwarts on the last night of May, which Harry would later reflect was almost exactly 5 years after a goblin had opened a garden gate in Surrey without touching it, and the symmetry pleased the part of him that the founders had sharpened, the part that liked the world to make a shape. They came up the dark from the direction of the village, a long line of black-cloaked figures with the Dementors wheeling above them like the smoke of a fire that fed on joy, and at their head walked the thing that had been Tom Riddle, restored to a body that was no longer quite a man's, white and serpentine and terrible, the most feared face in Britain wearing the most feared shape, and the great snake poured along the ground beside him carrying the last scrap of his soul. He had perhaps 50 followers, which was not many to take a castle, except that they were the worst wizards alive and they had chosen this, and they believed their master could not die, because their master had told them so for 40 years, and they did not know the ledger had been balanced behind their backs. The ministry was not there. The ministry was at that hour in emergency session, debating whether the reports could possibly be true, and Cornelius Fudge was explaining to frightened Chamber that the calmest response was no response, and so the defense of Wizarding Britain came down as it always did to school and to the people who loved it. They were not unprepared. Harry had not spent 2 years dismantling a Dark Lord's immortality without also preparing the ground he knew the war would end on. The students above 3rd year who wished to stay had stayed and been trained, quietly all spring, by a headmaster and a lord who had stopped pretending the threat was theoretical. The staff stood ready. Dumbledore stood at the great doors in robes the color of the night sky, the most powerful wizard in Britain, and beside him stood a 13-year-old who owned the ground they would defend, and the two of them had long since stopped arguing about who commanded, because the answer had become obvious to both. Dumbledore commanded the wizards, and Harry commanded the castle, and the castle was the larger force. The neutral houses came. That was the thing Harry had bought with 2 years of being a power above sides instead of a leader of one, and it arrived in the darkened hour before the army. A column of wizards from the houses that bowed to no one and burned for no one, Greengrass at their head, Cyrus Grey and cold and armed, his daughter Daphne beside him with her wand out and her face composed, because the neutral houses had decided at last that there was a thing worth standing behind, and the thing was not a faction but a wall. And the wall was Harry's. Behind them came the Longbottoms, Augusta in front with her vulture hat and her terrible wand, Neville at her side, no longer round-faced and frightened, but something harder and better, a lighthouse that had always followed Dumbledore by choice now choosing, with him, to follow the lord of the castle into the worst night of the age. House Malfoy was not there at all, which told the dark wizards at the gates, had any of them been able to read it, that their cause had already begun to come apart at the edges. They will breach the wards, Dumbledore said quietly at the doors, watching the black line advance. Mine, at least. The wards I have layered over a century are strong, but they answer to me, and I am only a headmaster, and a headmaster's wards can be broken by a wizard of his power given time and fury, and he has both. He glanced at the child beside him. But they are not the only wards on this castle anymore, are they? No, Harry said. He had his hand flat on the great door and threw it on the wardstone in the cellar of the world, and the castle was awake all around him, every torch leaning, every stair set, the whole vast living building braced and ready and furious in the patient way of old stone. Your wards are a coat the castle wears, mine are its skin. He can tear the coat. He's going to find the skin doesn't come off. He looked at the advancing dark, at the thing that had killed his parents come at last to take the one thing it had always wanted, and he allowed himself, for the length of one breath, the single-named feeling he would permit in the whole long night, which was not fear and not hatred but something colder and more useful, a deep and settled readiness, the readiness of a wizard who has prepared for exactly this for 5 years and is at last going to be allowed to use what he is. Let them break the coat, headmaster, hold the grounds, keep the children behind us alive, leave the thing at the center to me. He's not coming for the school. He's coming for the deed, and the deed is in the deepest stone, and when he goes down to it, I'll be there because it's mine, and a landlord meets his trespasser at the door of the room that matters. The wards broke at midnight with a sound like a cathedral falling, and the dark came into Hogwarts, and the battle that the storybooks would spend a century retelling began in earnest. It was not at the front a duel of two great wizards. It was a war, ugly and fast and full of the particular courage of ordinary people defending a thing they loved. Curses crossed the dark grounds in green and red and white. The Dementors swept down and were met by a sky full of silver. because Harry had spent the spring teaching the patronus to every student who could hold one, the way the founders had taught their first pupils to defend the wall, and the grounds of Hogwarts filled with silver animals, a stag and an otter and a hare and 100 more, driving the cold back up into the dark. Dumbledore fought at the center of the line like a force of weather, an old wizard who had not used the whole of himself in 40 years and used it now, and the Death Eaters who came against him learned, one after another, why a Dark Lord had feared this one wizard above all others. And the castle fought. This was the thing the army had not been told, because their master had not believed it, because their master could not believe that a building would refuse him. Having spent 40 years certain the building had merely been waiting for a wizard strong enough to take it. The stairs of Hogwarts turned beneath the Death Eaters' feet and carried them into walls. The doors slammed and locked against the dark and opened wide for the children of the castle. Suits of armor came down off their plinths and fought, not by Dumbledore's charm, which could animate them, but by Harry's will, which commanded them, and they fought like things defending a home. The very corridors lengthened and shortened to scatter the invaders and gather the defenders, the building rearranging its own anatomy to fight for the blood that built it, and the Death Eaters, who had come to take a castle, found themselves fighting the castle, and it was a thing they had no spell for, because there is no spell for being unwelcome in a house that is alive and knows your name and hates it. Daphne Greengrass fought back to back with Neville Longbottom in the entrance hall, the cold neutral girl and the brave loyal boy, and held the stair to the dormitories where the younger children sheltered and did not give a step. Hermione Granger, who had read every book 3 times, had read the right ones, and stood at the heart of the defense, turning her 3 times read theory into a wall of shield charms that held when older wizards failed, because she had understood the spells and not merely learned them, the way her friend had always told her to. The half-giant Hagrid waded through the dark with his great fists and his crossbow and his vast, uncomplicated love of the school, and the dark came apart against him. And above them all the silver animals wheeled and the torches blazed and the old stone fought, and slowly, through the long middle of the night, the army that had come to take Hogwarts began to understand that it was losing to a house. There was a moment, near the worst of it, when the line nearly broke. A knot of the dark wizards reached the great doors and threw against them a spell that even the castle flinched from, an old curse that ate at stone, and for the length of 3 heartbeats the doors buckled and the cold poured in and the children behind the line cried out, and Harry at the center of it felt the wound in the castle as a wound in himself and understood that a house, even a living house, even his house, could be hurt past bearing if the wizards inside it faltered. The stone could fight. The stone could not win alone. It needed the people the way the people needed it, the Hufflepuff lesson made suddenly literal in fire and breaking rock, the loyalty that ran both ways or did not run at all. So Harry did the thing the founders had built the wall to wait for, which was not a feat of power but an act of holding together. He sent his will out through the wardstone into every defender at once, not commanding them, steadying them, the way Helga's warmth had steadied the dissolving clarity in the vault, and the line felt their lord with them in the stone under their feet and remembered why they had stayed, and they held. Daphne's shield charms flared back to full. Neville planted his feet on a stair that firmed itself beneath him. An older student Harry did not know by name stepped into the gap at the doors and cast a patronus that came out of her wand not as an animal but as a blaze of pure silver certainty, because she had stopped being afraid and the cold went back, and the doors, with their lord's attention on them, knit their wounded stone closed again. The dark broke against the held line and did not break it. It was, Harry thought, watching the tide turn in the gray hour before dawn, the truest thing the 4 houses had ever done together, and not one of the storybooks would ever get it right, because the storybooks would say a boy saved a castle, and the truth was that a castle and the wizards who loved it had saved each other, and the Lord had only held the 2 halves of that together long enough for it to be true. But Lord Voldemort had not come to fight the house at the doors. He had come for the deed, and while his followers spent themselves against the castle's skin, he went down. He went down the way Harry had gone down 2 years before, through the 3rd-floor corridor and the trapdoor and the deep ways under the school, blasting through the Founder's gauntlet with a power and fury that the old defenses, keyed to recognize the air, were never built to refuse an enemy of his strength. The castle fought him every yard. It threw its stairs and its stone and its lengthening dark against him, and it slowed him, and it could not stop him because he carried a claim, the ring's bloodline burning in him even cleansed of its soul peace, the proof that he was Slytherin's heir, and a true claim, even a lesser one, is a key that turns some locks that fury cannot. He went down through the screaming, fighting castle toward the wardstone in the cellar of the world, the deep heart-rock into which 4 founders had bound the soul of the school, and Harry left the battle at the doors to Dumbledore and the houses and the silver sky, and went down to meet him, because the deed was the room that mattered, and the Lord meets his trespasser there. Wardstone Chamber was the oldest room in the world that had walls, and Harry had been in it only once, the night he cleansed the diadem, and he came into it now from the air stair, the secret way that opened only for him, and Lord Voldemort came into it from the gauntlet, blasting the last door off its hinges, and the two of them stood at last in the deep heart of Hogwarts with the Wardstone between them. It was not what the storybooks would later draw. It was not a glowing crystal on an altar. It was the floor and the walls and the ceiling. It was the chamber itself, a single mass of black living rock the size of a cathedral, veined through with a faint, slow light like the light Harry had seen in the Founder's vault, the bound soul of the school breathing in the dark, and to stand in it was to stand inside the heart of the thing they were fighting over, and both of them felt it, the wizard and the child, the claimant and the lord. "So," said Voldemort in his high cold voice, and the red eyes found Harry across the breathing stone. "The little lord, come down to his cellar at last alone as he came 2 years ago. You are predictable, Harry Potter. You meet me always in the deep places, always alone, always certain. It is the certainty I will enjoy taking from you. Do you know what this stone is? Better than you do," Harry said. He stood easy in the chamber, his hand not on a wand, because he did not need one here least of all. "It's the Wardstone, the soul of the school, the thing the deed points to. And you're going to tell me about the Black Rite now, because you've waited 40 years to say it to someone and there's no one left who'd understand, and a wizard who's about to win always explains. It's the one weakness all of you share." The red eyes flared because it was true, and because being red was the one thing Voldemort had never learned to bear. "The right is simple," he hissed, "and it is old, and it is mine by right, because I am Slytherin's heir, of the blood of Salazar, of the line of the Gaunts and the Peverils before them, and you are a Potter mongrel who stumbled into 4 houses by an accident of breeding. The stone answers to a holder, but a holder may be replaced. Spill the holder's blood upon the stone he holds, with a true founder's claim in your hand, and the stone is torn from the dead and bound to the claimant. I will kill you here on this rock with Slytherin's blood in my veins, and the castle that cast me out as a boy will have no choice, by its own ancient law, but to call me lord over your cooling body. I will take the one thing it denied me. I will become what it would not let me be. And every wall that fought my followers tonight will turn the instant you die and fight for me." He raised his wand, and the green light of the killing curse gathered at its tip, the same curse that had killed Harry's parents, the same that had rebounded 12 years before. "You should not have come alone, little lord. You should not have come at all." "You're right about the right," Harry said, and he did not move, did not reach for a wand, did not flinch from the gathering green. "You're right about all of it. The blood, the claim, the transfer. It's real founder law, and it works exactly the way you said. There's only one thing you got wrong, Tom, and it's the same thing you've gotten wrong your whole life, the thing that put you in this cellar instead of on a throne. You think a claim is a claim. You think Slytherin's blood is a key." He spread his hands, and the 4 rings on them caught the slow light of the breathing stone, lion and serpent and eagle and badger, red and green and blue and the color of bread. "I hold Slytherin too, your claim, your house. The cup, the locket, the ring, all reclaimed, all mine, the whole inheritance of Salazar gathered into the heir who holds it with 3 others. You're not Slytherin's heir contesting an outsider. You're a single-house claimant standing in front of the heir paramount, and the oldest law there is, the law the founders wrote before they wrote any other, says that 1 house cannot outweigh 4. Your right needs the stone to choose between us. I've spent 5 years making sure that when it does, it isn't even a choice." Voldemort cast the curse because he was who he was, and the green light leapt across the breathing chamber toward the child who owned it, and the Wardstone answered its lord. The black rock that was the floor and the walls and the ceiling, the bound soul of the school, the heart of 4 founders, magic, woke fully for the first time in 1,000 years, woke the way it had only ever half-woken in the vault in the 3rd-floor chamber, and it rose to defend the blood it answered to with the whole of what it was. The green curse struck a wall of black stone that grew between Harry and the light in the space of no time at all, and the stone drank the killing curse the way the dungeon had drunk Voldemort's curses 2 years before, because a wizard cannot kill the heir of a house inside the heart of that house any more than he can stab the sea. And then the chamber turned on the claimant. It did not crush him. Harry would not let it crush him, because there was a thing that had to happen first, a thing that founder law required and Harry's own nature demanded, which was that it be done correctly in front of the law, with the claim tested and not merely the wizard killed. The breathing stone rose around Lord Voldemort and held him, the way it had held Quirrell, gently and absolutely, and the slow light in its veins brightened, and into the chamber came the thing Harry had felt in the Founder's vault, the 4 impressions, the contract-given voices, lion and serpent and eagle and badger, fire and shadow and clarity, and the patient brown weight, gathered now not in a vault under London, but in the heart of their own school to judge a claim upon it. "The right is invoked," said the 4 of them in the braided voice under the language, and it filled the breathing chamber. A claimant spills the holder's blood upon the stone, with the founder's claim in hand, and asks the stone to choose. "We are the stone, we will choose. Let both claims be WIGHED. He holds Slytherin, Harry said into the chamber, and he said it fairly because the founders had taught him that a thing taken unfairly is not truly held by blood. The Gaunt line, the Peveril line, true descent from Salazar. I won't pretend his claim is false. It's real. Weigh it honestly. I'd rather win this true than win it easy. A Slytherin claim, the four agreed, and Salazar's green shadow regarded the white serpentine thing held in the stone with an expression that was almost grief, the grief of a founder looking at the worst of what his house could become. It is real. Tom Riddle is of my blood. The green shadow turned. And what do you hold, Keystone? All four, Harry said. Gryffindor's courage that walked into your vault, Ravenclaw's mind that read your test, Slytherin's blood the same as his, reclaimed and held clean, and Hufflepuff's loyalty that caught me when the other three would have torn me apart, and that I turned 2 years ago on the piece of him you'd left in me, and chose the children sleeping upstairs over the power he offered. I hold his house and 3 others. I hold them reconciled, which none of you could do in life, and which is the whole of the test you hid the school's strength behind. He holds one house in fury alone. Weigh it. The 4 impressions of the founders of Hogwarts were silent in the breathing dark, and then, one by one, they turned from the single house claimant held in the stone to the keystone who held all 4, and they bowed, the way they had bowed in the vault, fire and shadow and clarity and warmth, and even Salazar's green shadow bent to the heir who held his house better than his own blood descendant ever could. The stone has chosen, the 4 said, and the breathing chamber blazed up into a single column of white standing light, the same light that had keystoned the wall in the vault under London, and the light was every color at once, red and green and blue and the color of bread, and it was the verdict of the oldest law there is. One house cannot outweigh 4. The keystone holds. The claimant is denied. And a claimant who invokes the right and is denied has spent, in the invoking, the last claim he will ever hold. Voldemort understood in the white light that he had lost, and he did the only thing he had ever truly been good at, which was refuse to die, and he reached for the immortality he had bought for 40 years, reached for the anchors, reached for the pieces of his soul that had always brought him back. There was one left. The snake far above in the chaos of the grounds, carrying the last scrap of him. And in the entrance hall of Hogwarts, in the same moment, Neville Longbottom, of a house that had always followed by choice, who had spent 2 years becoming something harder and better than the frightened boy on the train, found the great snake coiling toward the children he and Daphne were guarding, and he did the thing his grandmother would have done, the thing a brave, loyal wizard does without calculating the cost, and he took up the sword that had appeared to him out of the castle's need, Godric Gryffindor's own blade. The one relic the Dark Lord had never been able to corrupt, and he struck the head from the snake in a single stroke, and the last anchor of Lord Voldemort came apart in silver fire. In the Wardstone chamber, the white light at the heart of Hogwarts found a Dark Lord who was, for the first time in 40 years, only a wizard mortal undefended, his immortality spent, his claim denied, his army breaking on a castle that hated him, alone in the heart of the one thing he had ever wanted, with the blood of Salazar Slytherin in his veins and no house left that would answer it. It's over, Tom, Harry said, and the breathing stone released the broken thing it had held, because the founders had judged and the judgment was made and the castle had no further use for cruelty. Not because I'm stronger than you. I'm 13, I'm not stronger than you. It's over because you spent your whole life trying to take a thing that can only be given, and you tried to take it from a house that decides for itself who it loves, and it was never, ever going to be you, because you came to it with one house and a fury, and I came to it with 4 houses and a reason, and the reason was the children upstairs and the mother who spent herself for me, and the simple fact that a home does not betray the blood that built it. You wanted to be Slytherin's heir. I am Slytherin's heir, and Gryffindor and Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff's, and I'm the one the stone chose, and I'm the one who's going to end this here in the room you spent 40 years trying to reach, and you're going to die knowing the house you wanted never once stopped being mine. Lord Voldemort raised his wand one last time, mortal and furious and refusing to the end, and Harry Potter, lord of all 4 founding houses, did not raise a wand at all. He laid his hand flat against the breathing stone, his stone, the heart of his house, and he asked it in the underlanguage for the last thing, and the castle that had waited 1,000 years for a keystone that knew it was a keystone gave its lord what he asked, and the deepest magic of Hogwarts, the bound soul of 4 founders, rose through the floor and the walls in Harry's own clean undivided blood, and fell upon the last Dark Lord of the age like a mountain choosing at last to move. When it was done, the chamber was quiet, and the slow light breathed in the veins of the stone, and there was nothing left in the heart of Hogwarts but its lord, standing alone, exactly as he had come. They cleaned up the way the living always clean up after the dark, slowly and at great cost, and with a stubborn insistence on going on. The army broke when its master fell, the surviving Death Eaters fleeing into a dawn that found the Ministry suddenly, loudly present, eager to arrest wizards who could no longer fight back and to claim, in lime green prose, a victory it had spent the night debating whether to acknowledge. Harry let them. A ministry busy taking credit was a ministry not asking how a 13-year-old had ended a war, and there were things about the Wardstone chamber that Harry intended to keep. The way the goblins kept things sealed and true and silent because the world did not need to know the exact mechanism by which its monster had died. It needed only to know that the monster was dead, and that the dead stayed dead now, all the anchors gone, the ledger balanced, the long debt paid in full. The grounds were full of the silver fading of 100 patronesses and the harder business of the wounded and the few, the very few who had been loved and lost, and Harry walked among them in the grey light and did the work a lord does, which is to be present, to be seen, to share the cost and not stand above it, because Helga had taught him in a vault under London that the gift that lasts is the one that stays. Neville sat on the steps with Gryffindor's sword across his knees, white and shaking and forever changed, and Harry sat beside him and said the true thing, which was that the snake had been the last piece and that Neville had ended a Dark Lord with a single stroke and that his grandmother was going to be insufferable about it, and Neville laughed, which was the point. Daphne stood with her father among the neutral houses that had chosen at last to stand for something, and caught Harry's eye across the grey grounds, and inclined her head the precise degree that from a greengrass was an embrace. Hermione found him, as Hermione always found him first, and looked at him for a long moment and then simply took his hand, because there are things that even a girl who has read every book 3 times knows are better said without words. The goblins came at dawn, which surprised the surviving ministry officials, who had not known goblins left the bank for anything, and which did not surprise Harry at all. Scarnack crossed the scarred grounds in his charcoal wool, unhurried, carrying a flat case of black leather, exactly as he had carried one up a garden path in Surrey 5 years before, and Grindel came behind him, ancient and unbending, his Riverstone eyes moving over the wreckage and the wounded and the healing stone with the cool, comprehensive attention of an auditor totaling a column. They stopped in front of Harry, and Scarnack looked him up and down, the 13-year-old standing in the ruin of the longest night of the age, and the not-quite smile returned to the border of his mouth. 5 years ago, Scarnack said, you sat in a chair too big for you and asked me what was in the account. I told you I did not fully know. I find this morning that I am at last in a position to complete the answer. He did not open the case. He did not need to. The account contained a school, a war, and the question of who you would become when the two of them met. The blood told us the first the day it dried. The second arrived on schedule, as wars do. And the third, Lord Potter, has just resolved itself on a foundation stone 3 floors beneath us, in a manner the bank will record, seal, and never discuss, which is the highest honor my institution is capable of paying anyone, and we are paying it to a child who walked into our verification chamber at 8 and asked about the ink. You came all this way to tell me my account's settled, Harry said. I came, Scarnack said, because an auditor attends the closing of a great account in person, as a matter of professional respect, and because Grindel insisted, which he will deny, and because there is a thing the bank owes you that is not gold. He inclined his head, the slow goblin bow given only to equals and to debts intended to be honored. We told you that first day that we were not your friends, we were your auditors. It happened, we said, that the two pointed the same direction, and we warned you the alignment would not always hold. It held, Lord Potter. For 5 years, against every reason it should not have, it held, and I find that I no longer wish to call it alignment, and I am too old to learn a warmer word, so I will simply say that the bank is glad, which is a thing the bank has not been on record as being in 900 years. Do not quote me to the auditors. Grindel behind him said nothing, but the ancient Riverstone eyes warmed by some fraction too small to measure, the same fraction they had warmed in a chamber 5 years before when a frightened, fearless child had refused to pretend he was not afraid, and that, from Grindel, was an entire speech. And Albus Dumbledore came across the grounds in the dawn, an old wizard who had used the whole of himself and would pay for it, who had spent 100 years certain he was the thing standing between the world and the dark, and who had spent the night fighting under the command of a child who owned the ground they bled for, and he stopped in front of Harry, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The wizard who had lost Hogwarts and the child who had won it standing together in the wreckage of the night they had in the end defended together. It began at a doorstep, Dumbledore said at last. Mine. I left you on one and I told myself it was love, and you have spent 5 years showing me the difference between deciding for someone and standing beside them, which is a lesson I should not have needed at my age and needed all the same, and have, I think, finally learned. He looked up at the castle, his castle that had never been his, scarred and smoking and already beginning under its lord's quiet attention to heal. You could remove me now. After tonight no one would question it. The wizard who lost Hogwarts to a child stepping down at last. You have the deed, the veto, the standing, and the whole world's gratitude. Why have you not done it? Because you're good at the job, Harry said, and the children need you, and I'm 13 and have no interest in marking essays. The same reasons as the first night, they haven't changed. He looked at the old wizard, at the steel and the grief and the 100 years of certainty finally laid down. You don't work for me, headmaster. You never did, really. That was always a thing I said to make a point. You work for the school the same as I do. The difference, the only one that ever mattered, is that now we both know who the school belongs to, and it isn't either of us. It belongs to itself and to the blood that built it and to the children sleeping in its towers, and we're just the two wizards lucky enough to be allowed to defend it. That's all I ever wanted, not to own you, to stop being owned. I've got that now. You can keep your office, I'll keep my house, and we'll run it together in the light the way we should have from the start. The sun came up over the loch and the mountains and the scarred and healing castle, and it found, standing together in the wreckage of the longest night of the age, an old wizard who had finally learned the difference between love and control, and a boy of 13 who had walked into a bank 5 years before to have his blood read by a goblin and walked out the lord of all 4 founding houses, and the school that belonged to neither of them and answered in the deep stone of its breathing heart. To the keystone who had held 4 quarreling founders together long enough to save it. Harry Potter put his hand flat against the great doors of the house his family had built, and the doors opened for their lord the way they had opened on the first night, the way they would open for the rest of his life, and he went inside to begin the work of living in the thing he owned, which was, in the end, the only thing he had ever truly wanted and the hardest and the most worth the cost. Chapter 7 End.